School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. We got a World War III alert. Iran is not Venezuela. Trump is under major pressure, but he will attack. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Revolution is a way of life, and revolutions for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some revolutionary lunch for y'all. World War III alert. Let's get into the content. Salute.
These pictures we're getting in of the airspace over Iran. Have a look at what has happened here in the last few hours. Iranian airspace has been closed now.
The skies over the Middle East fell suddenly silent.
And moments ago, Iran closed its airspace without explanation.
Now remember, when the U.S. parked these aircraft carriers and these naval assets off the coast of Venezuela, Venezuela didn't crumble, but some leaders was bought off. So some pressure was formed in Venezuela where they didn't stand up as stiff as they were supposed to. Iran is saying, we're not Venezuela. We're not scared of your aircraft carriers. We will do what Venezuela can't do, and we will hit those aircraft carriers if you attack us.
For a few tense hours now, Iran did something that instantly rippled across flight tracking maps, airline operations rooms, and military planning cells. It temporarily shut down large portions of its airspace to most traffic beginning from yesterday, January 25th to April. The closure unfolded overnight across the Tehran Flight Information Region, the OIIX Tehran FIR, with notices indicating that most flights were prohibited in defined windows, one stretching from about 1:45 a.m. to 4:00 a.m. local time and another from about 4:44 a.m. to 7 a.m. before overflights and normal patterns began resuming around the morning reopening. In parallel, other advisories described the restriction as broad, effectively closing the sky to all but a narrow category of flights, such as international flights to and from Iran that had explicit permission, triggering reroutes, delays, diversions, and a visible emptying out of Iranian airspace on trackers, while aircraft flowed around Iran's borders instead. Airlines didn't treat it like a routine hiccup. Within days, carriers were still avoiding Iranian and in some cases Iraqi corridors, while aviation authorities and regulators warned that the region's instability had raised the risk environment for civil aviation. Take a moment to support this video by hitting the like button. Tell me in the comment if you support Iran's display of readiness unlike Venezuela. Do not forget to hit the subscribe button and turn all notifications so you don't miss our important updates this period. Remember, they are all free of charge, but it would support honest journalism. Thank you. Now, timing of the shutdown, which spans nearly 3 months, is the part you really have to sit with because it's what turns an aviation disruption story into a strategic signal. At the same moment Iran was tightening the sky, Washington was publicly talking up a major regional military posture shift, an armada narrative, a carrier strike group moving toward the Middle East, and the kind of readiness messaging that's designed to be heard in Tehran as loudly as it's heard at home. U.S. officials indicated the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, and accompanying guided missile destroyers were headed toward the region, with additional air defense assets also being considered, while U.S. imagery and reporting pointed to combat aircraft deployments and integrated air and missile defense coordination in theater. When you put those pieces side by side, Iran's airspace shutdown starts to look less like panic and more like a deliberate, proactive lock-the-doors move, like bolting your house the moment you notice unfamiliar cars slowly circling the block, because it forces anything approaching Iran's air picture to become easier to interpret, harder to mask, and more expensive to execute without early warning. To truly grasp why Iran timed this airspace shutdown so perfectly against the backdrop of these deployments and what it quietly changes for any potential conflict, you have to stop thinking of airspace as just a place planes fly and start seeing it the way militaries see it, as a managed battle space, a sensor environment, and a decision-making funnel. First, let's pin down what the shutdown actually did in practical terms. A short notice closure compresses the sky. It reduces the clutter of civilian traffic that can complicate identification, deconfliction, and rules of engagement decisions. It creates a controlled window where Iran can prioritize radar coverage, tighten command and control procedures, and run air defense integration at a higher tempo without the constant requirement to separate civilian flows from military air tracks. That might sound abstract, but it's the difference between trying to coordinate a complex security operation in a crowded market versus doing it after clearing the streets. It also has a signaling function. When a state is worried about surprise action, it doesn't just move missiles, it reshapes the environment in which warning and response happen. Now, if you're wondering why this matters so much to Iran specifically, history gives you some painfully clear answers. In July 1988, a US warship shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing everyone aboard in a high-tension environment where identification and escalation dynamics went catastrophically wrong. Whatever one believes about intent, the lesson Iran absorbed is straightforward. In a militarized corridor, misreads happen fast and civilians pay. Then in January 2020, amid heightened alerts after major US-Iran escalations, Iran's air defense network tragically misidentified and shot down a Ukrainian passenger jet shortly after takeoff from Tehran, again highlighting how lethal fog of crisis can be when air defenses are on edge. So, when Iran sharply constricts airspace during a spike in tension, one argument, quietly persuasive to many inside Iran's security culture, is that it is reducing the probability of accidental disaster at the exact moment adversaries are posturing and everyone's trigger discipline is under stress. There's another angle that matters just as much: intelligence collection and shaping activity. Modern air campaigns don't start with the first strike, they start with pattern building. They start with sensing, probing, and mapping, sometimes with overt assets, sometimes with subtler ones, and often with an effort to blend into the ordinary rhythm of the region. A temporary airspace lockdown doesn't eliminate an adversary's ability to observe Iran, but it can disrupt the easy options. It forces reroutes that may expose flight paths and timing. It pushes commercial carriers away from corridors that can complicate the air picture. And it creates a cleaner radar and signals environment for Iran to watch what changes around its periphery. If you imagine stealth and surprise like someone trying to walk through a crowd unnoticed, Iran's move is like emptying the hallway and turning on brighter lights. You may not catch everything, but you make quiet movement much harder. This is where the airspace as a defensive multiplier concept becomes really important. Iran's layered air defenses, built around a mix of long-range systems, medium-range coverage, short-range point defense, and a dense radar network, depend on integration. The public conversation often gets stuck on a single name, but in practice, the question is whether Iran can fuse tracks, assign interceptors, and manage engagements under pressure. A controlled airspace environment helps that system behave more predictably. If Iran believes a surprise air campaign is a plausible risk, then compressing civilian traffic and tightening flight permissions is a way to make its own air defense network less ambiguous and more responsive in a crisis window. Now let's talk about the political economy under the surface, because this is the part many audiences feel but don't always articulate. Iran has spent years under sanctions pressure that targets not only discrete behaviors, but the state's ability to transact. Banking access, oil revenue pathways, shipping networks, and the broader financial plumbing that makes a modern economy function. Whatever one thinks of Iran's leadership, from Tehran's perspective, the pattern is obvious. Economic constraint is used as a strategic tool to force policy change or weaken state capacity. So, when Iran sees military signaling layered on top of financial coercion, it interprets it as a two-handed strategy: squeeze the lifelines while keeping a credible threat of force in the background. In that environment, Tehran's instinct is to demonstrate that coercion will not be cost-free, that Iran has agency, options, and the capacity to raise the price of escalation. That's why Iranian messaging during this period wasn't just bureaucratic, it was psychologically calibrated. Days ago, Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander was quoted using the phrase "finger on the trigger," describing a posture of heightened readiness as US warships moved toward the region. You can hear two audiences in that sentence. One is external, a warning designed to deter miscalculation. The other is internal, reassurance that the state's security institutions are alert, mobilized, and not passive in the face of threats. In deterrence theory, that internal audience matters more than many people think because domestic morale and elite cohesion shape how credible a threat appears to outsiders. Yesterday, Iran unveiled a prominent mural in Tehran's Enkelab Square showing a damaged US aircraft carrier and wrecked aircraft arranged to evoke an American flag motif paired with the line, "If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind." This wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. Think of it as deterrence theater, a public, nationally legible story that says, "We see the carrier, we have a response narrative ready, and we want you to believe escalation ends badly." It also functions as a morale artifact, something citizens, security forces, and political elites can rally around in a moment of intense pressure and uncertainty. And this is where the conversation usually slides into weapons. So let's handle that carefully and intelligently. Iran's deterrence portfolio is built around asymmetric leverage, systems designed to impose costs on superior conventional forces by saturating defenses, complicating logistics, and stretching response capacity. That includes large inventories of drones and loitering munitions, a wide missile ecosystem, and anti-ship options intended to make maritime operations riskier near Iran's shores. The point is not that a carrier is easy to sink. It isn't. The point is that Iran aims to make carrier operations feel expensive enough, uncertain enough, and politically risky enough that decision makers hesitate. That is classic deterrence by denial and punishment blended together. On the missile side, Iran has highlighted systems it describes as hypersonic, like the Fatah missile family. Analysts debate labels and performance claims, but what matters for deterrence is the message, maneuverability, speed, and the promise of defeating missile defenses. Even if you treat the rhetoric with caution, Iran's goal is clear: create doubt in the mind of an adversary about whether defenses can reliably intercept everything in a fast, complex raid environment. And doubt is powerful because planners have to assume worst-case possibilities when lives, ships, and political credibility are on the line. On the drone side, the lesson of recent wars is even more concrete. Large-scale drone waves have been used to exhaust air defenses, consume interceptors, and create openings for other munitions, an approach observed repeatedly in the Russia-Ukraine context where Iranian-designed Shahed-type drones and their derivatives have been used in volume to pressure defenses over time. Translate that logic to a maritime theater and the concept becomes saturation stress, not one perfect hit, but repeated pressure that strains radars, reaction time, and intercept capacity. Again, the strategic point is leverage, forcing the other side to spend more, deploy more, and accept more risk. Iran also emphasizes anti-ship ballistic missile concepts, systems discussed for years as part of a wider keep-out toolkit, including missiles described as designed to target ships at sea. Here, the key idea is not a Hollywood scenario, it's operational friction. Even the possibility of credible anti-ship missiles changes how naval forces distribute, defend, and operate, how far they stand off, how they coordinate escorts, how they layer sensors, and how they protect logistics nodes. In deterrence terms, Iran doesn't need certainty, it needs plausibility strong enough to alter US and allied behavior. And there's a sovereignty argument here that's easy to miss if you only view events through the lens of Western commentary. Control of national airspace is among the most basic functions of a state. In periods of heightened threat, asserting that control is not unusual. It is, in a sense, the state doing what states are expected to do, prioritizing safety, readiness, and decision integrity. That's why, even though the closure disrupted travel, the logic can be defended domestically as a protective measure. Better a night of diversions than a crisis hour tragedy. better a controlled sky than one, better a posture that buys time than one that surrenders it. If you're still wondering whether Tehran intended this as a direct response to US messaging, consider how quickly the regional ecosystem reacted. Airlines adjusted routes and suspended overflights. Regulators issued warnings. Headlines focused on carrier movement, force protection, and the possibility of strikes. And Iranian officials framed any violation as escalation into all-out war. In other words, the shutdown didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened inside a live signaling contest where each side tries to shape the other's choices without firing a shot. And here's the final piece I want you to hold on to, because it's the part that often gets lost in the noise. Deterrence is not only about weapons. It's about shaping perception, time, and risk. Iran's airspace lockdown did all three at once. It told adversaries, you will not get the clean conditions you want. It told its own institutions, we are reducing uncertainty in the most dangerous domain. And it told the region, if you're planning something, we're planning around it. In a moment when a carrier group is moving, air defenses are on alert, and rhetoric is sharpening, that kind of move isn't random. It's a calculated bid to keep the initiative where it matters most, in the decision cycle before the first shot. Thank you for watching. Seeing you the next update. Subscribe to support honest journalism. Thank you.
Iran says one mistake and US bases burn. Trump says his next strike will make last year look like peanuts. Carriers surge east, fighter jets flood the region, and Tehran goes on high alert. With both sides loading their lines, one question now hangs in the air. Who fires first in West Asia? Tensions in the Middle East are spiking fast. Iran's telling the US one wrong move could blow the whole region over. Esmail Kawsari, senior Iranian lawmaker and former Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander, just issued a blunt warning. If the US strikes Iran, Tehran's response will be lethal and deterrent.
In the event of any US mistake, its bases in West Asia will be targeted.
Kawsari sits on Iran's Parliamentary National Security and Foreign Policy Committee. He says any US mistake gets hit with decisive retaliation. His comments come as American military presence in the region swells and Washington's rhetoric gets sharper. Sayed Majid Musavi, commander of the IRGC's Aerospace Division, went further. In a video on state TV, he called Trump all talk and said he's chosen the wrong path on Iran.
Trump talks a lot, but he should be certain that he will receive his answer in the field.
Meanwhile, a senior Iranian official speaking anonymously to Times of Israel, ahead of the expected arrival of a US aircraft carrier strike group in the region, warned that Iran would treat any form of attack as a declaration of war.
This military buildup, we hope it is not intended for real confrontation. But our military is ready for the worst-case scenario. This is why everything is on high alert in Iran. This time we will treat any attack, limited, unlimited, surgical, kinetic, whatever they call it, as an all-out war against us. We will respond in the hardest way possible to settle this.
Meanwhile, regional diplomatic and military activity has intensified. Israel's public broadcaster Kan reported that the commander of US Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, is expected to arrive in Israel on January 24th for talks with senior officials. His visit comes as Washington continues to signal that military options against Iran remain on the table. Israeli media also reported that White House advisor Jared Kushner and US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are due in Israel for discussions with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. While talks are expected to focus on Hamas, Gaza, and efforts to secure the release of the last remaining hostage, Ran Gvili, Iran is also likely to feature in the discussions. President Trump has previously threatened military action if Iran carried out mass executions of detainees or killed peaceful protesters. Although he later claimed Iran had halted the execution of hundreds of protesters, a claim denied by Tehran's chief prosecutor, Trump has continued to issue warnings. Speaking aboard Air Force One on January 22nd, he said any US strike would make last year's attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities look like peanuts, adding that a large US naval force was heading towards the region. The aircraft carrier, USS Abraham Lincoln, and 3 accompanying destroyers have already left the South China Sea and are now in the Indian Ocean, a US Navy official told the Times of Israel. While the strike group has not yet entered Central Command's operational area, it is expected to do so in the coming days. Once in theater, the carrier group would join other US naval assets, including warships in the Persian Gulf and vessels stationed in Bahrain. The deployment would add thousands of American personnel to the region, where major US bases, such as Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, already host large troop contingents. The United States has also increased its air presence, with F-15E Strike Eagle fighter jets now operating in the Middle East. Britain, too, has deployed Typhoon fighter jets to Qatar in what it describes as a defensive move. Analysts have also tracked a surge in US military cargo flights into the region, mirroring preparations seen ahead of last year's Israel-Iran conflict. As military forces gather and rhetoric sharpens on both sides, fears are growing that a single misstep could ignite a broader regional war.
Trump is moving his aircraft carriers toward the Gulf, and Netanyahu has raised the Iron Dome to its highest alert level, as if something is being quietly rearranged behind the scenes. Meanwhile, on the other side, Iran's coastlines are drowning in deception. Russian experts are inside fortified facilities. Naval missiles are being transported through sealed military routes, and underground sites are being reactivated without a sound. Everything points to a new Russian missile system being quietly deployed, a maritime nightmare that Iran has never officially confirmed receiving, yet it's present in every single calculation inside Washington. So what is this system capable of sinking Trump's most powerful naval assets? Has it already arrived on Iranian soil? There is much to uncover in this episode. Stay with us. Although Iran has not officially acknowledged its arrival, the Russian coastal defense system P-800 Bastion has effectively become a reality, planted along the shoreline, fully armed and ready to strike. This is confirmed by multiple overlapping intelligence and media reports, including a Reuters article from March 2025, which revealed the arrival of Russian missile experts at fortified Iranian military locations. Other reports spoke of Yakon missiles being transferred through covered channels, as well as the reactivation of underground facilities tied to Iran's coastal missile infrastructure. Western diplomatic sources further revealed that these moves movements coincide with the Strategic Cooperation Treaty signed between Moscow and Tehran in January 2025, a treaty later interpreted as the political cover for the transfer of Russian naval missile technologies to Iran, including systems like Onyx and Bastion. The facts on the ground are clear. The system has been deployed, concealed within the terrain, and made fully operational, coinciding precisely with the deployment of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower CVN-69 to the Gulf. This prompted U.S. military assessments to designate certain Iranian coastal sites as red zones due to the potential threat of supersonic cruise missile launches from those locations. But even more dangerous than the Passion system itself is the missile it carries. The P-800 Onyx, or Yak Hunt, in its export version, is no ordinary cruise missile. It's a highly intelligent offensive weapon designed to rip large warships out of the sea with supersonic speed and pinpoint accuracy that leaves no room for survival. It was developed as the successor to the Soviet Musket missile, but is far more than just an upgrade. It's a generational leap forward, especially in its ability to operate in coordinated swarms, using silent radar synchronization and pack attack logic. Structurally, the missile measures 8.6 meters in length, 700 millimeters in diameter, and weighs around 3,000 kilograms at launch. Its body features a stealth-optimized design that reduces radar visibility, coated with infrared absorbent material to minimize thermal detection, making it extremely hard to track even for US systems like Aegis or the SM-6. It uses a hybrid propulsion system. The first stage is a solid fuel booster, which detaches after launch and ignites a powerful ramjet engine capable of sustaining speeds up to Mach 2.5, which is over 3,000 kilometers per hour all the way to the target. This cuts down enemy reaction time to under 30 seconds in certain scenarios. The guidance system is sophisticated and precise. Initially, the missile follows an inertial navigation system before activating its internal active radar seeker in the terminal phase, allowing it to lock onto its target even in the presence of heavy jamming or decoys. In its Russian configurations, the seeker head is so advanced it can distinguish between naval vessels and automatically prioritize high-value targets, choosing, for example, an aircraft carrier over escorting destroyers. What truly sets Onyx apart, however, is its group intelligence system. In coordinated launches, a set of missiles can operate as a team. One acts as the leader, broadcasting tracking data, while the others fly silently with no radar emissions, minimizing their signature. If the lead missile is shot down, command seamlessly transfers to another, ensuring the attack continues without disruption. Its warhead is a high-explosive penetrator, weighing between 200 and 250 kilograms, engineered to breach the carrier's deck and reach lower levels before detonating. This could paralyze command systems or cause catastrophic fires on the flight deck. Unconfirmed reports suggest some Russian variants may be nuclear capable, with yields of up to 200 to 250 kilotons, though this has never been officially acknowledged in any export agreements. Onyx offers multiple flight profiles that overwhelm air defense systems. In the high-low mode, it ascends to 14 kilometers before diving to 10 to 15 meters near the target, giving it a maximum range of up to 600 kilometers in Russian versions. In full sea skimming mode, it flies at an ultra-low altitude throughout the flight, hugging the surface to stay below radar detection thresholds, with an operational range between 120 and 250 kilometers, depending on terrain and atmospheric conditions. This versatility allows Iran to adjust its strategic paths based on evolving radar threats while maintaining a high probability of penetrating enemy defenses. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this missile is its direct effect on US aircraft carriers. In theory, a single hit from Onyx to the island superstructure, the ammunition elevators, or the fuel storage decks would be enough to completely disable a carrier without sinking it. And since the terminal flight altitude is just 10 to 15 meters, radar detection time is limited to 25 to 30 seconds, which is far too short even for the most advanced US systems like Aegis to track, target, and intercept the missile with guaranteed success. Now, the question is yours, dear viewer. Do you believe Trump would risk pushing his aircraft carrier into the range of Iran's Bastion missiles, or does the US Navy still have cards it hasn't played yet? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
While the world tries to build walls of sanctions around Iran, China has been quietly building bridges. Not of steel or stone, but of oil, tech, and shrewd diplomacy. And these bridges are proving strong enough to withstand an economic siege. Today, we're exposing the 5 ways China props up Iran, a non-military alliance that's reshaping the world order right under our noses. For decades, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been one of the most isolated nations on earth. It's been hit with a relentless maximum pressure campaign of economic sanctions, led by the United States. The goal was simple: lock Tehran out of global finance, cripple its economy, and squeeze it into submission. But that submission never really came. Despite the intense pressure, Iran hasn't just survived, it has adapted. And in some ways, it's even thriving. So, how's that possible? A big part of the answer isn't in Tehran, but thousands of miles away, in Beijing. China has perfected a strategy of supporting Iran that's as powerful as any army, but without a single soldier, tank, or declaration of war. It's an alliance built on mutual interest, strategic ambition, and a shared goal of challenging the Western-led global order. This isn't just about two countries trading. It's about building a parallel system designed to bypass and maybe even undermine the very sanctions meant to bring Iran to its knees. Let's break down the 5 pillars of this alliance. The most powerful weapon used against Iran is cutting off its oil exports, the lifeblood of its economy. The logic is simple. If Iran can't sell its oil, its government runs out of cash. But what happens when the world's biggest oil importer decides to just keep buying? That's exactly what China has done. Beijing has become the #1 buyer of Iranian crude oil, and it's not even close. With most countries steering clear, China is absorbing a staggering amount of Iran's exports. Official numbers are murky, but data from tanker tracking shows a massive, consistent flow. In 2024, nearly all of Iran's petroleum exports went to China. China's imports from Iran have now almost doubled compared to the levels before the maximum pressure campaign began in 2018. This isn't a straightforward transaction, it's a sophisticated game of sanctions evasion. Iranian oil is often transferred between tankers in the middle of the sea, a ship-to-ship transfer, to hide its origin. It's then frequently relabeled as coming from places like Malaysia before heading to Chinese ports. This constant flow of oil, even at a heavy discount, gives Tehran the revenue it desperately needs to fund its government and regional activities. By keeping the taps open, China provides a massive economic lifeline, effectively neutralizing the West's most potent weapon and allowing Iran to stay afloat. Beyond the daily oil trade, China and Iran have laid out a much bigger vision, the 25-year Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Signed on March 27, 2021, this agreement is a roadmap for deep economic and security cooperation. On paper, it's a huge deal, promising up to $400 billion in Chinese investment in Iran's economy. This money is meant to overhaul everything from oil and gas infrastructure to transport, manufacturing, and tech. It officially brings Iran into China's massive global project, the Belt and Road Initiative, with plans to upgrade Iran's aging railways and ports. For an economy starved of foreign cash, this deal looks like a golden ticket to modernization, completely bypassing Western financial systems. But it's important to look past the headline numbers. While the $400 billion figure got everyone's attention, the actual investment has been much more cautious. Beijing is well aware that its companies could face U.S. secondary sanctions for doing business in Iran, so the rollout of big projects has been slow. Still, both sides constantly reaffirm their commitment, seeing the pact as the foundation for their future. This agreement is less about a sudden flood of cash and more about a long-term strategic alignment. It sends a clear signal to the world. China sees its future intertwined with Iran's and is willing to play the long game. China's support for Iran isn't just about money, it's also deeply diplomatic. For years, the U.S. strategy has been to isolate Iran politically and paint it as a regional menace. China, on the other hand, has been working to dismantle that narrative, not with confrontation, but with shrewd diplomacy. The most stunning example was in 2023, when Beijing brokered a historic peace deal between Iran and its longtime rival, Saudi Arabia. After years of hostility that pushed the region to the brink of war, the sight of Iranian and Saudi officials shaking hands in Beijing was a geopolitical earthquake. China pulled off something the U.S. hadn't managed in decades. It brought two regional giants to the negotiating table. This single act massively boosted Iran's standing, broke its diplomatic isolation, and legitimized it as a major player in regional security. On the world stage, especially at the United Nations, China often acts as a diplomatic shield for Iran. Beijing consistently opposes what it calls U.S. hegemony and unilateralism, giving Tehran political cover. For instance, when the U.S. recently threatened a blanket 25% tariff on any country that trades with Iran, China immediately condemned the move as economic coercion and vowed to protect its interests. This backing ensures Iran is never truly alone and that a powerful voice is always pushing back against Western pressure. One of the most underrated forms of Chinese support comes through groups that exist outside the Western bubble. The most important of these is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO. Originally a Central Asian security bloc, the SCO has grown to include heavyweights like India, Russia, and, since becoming a full member in 2023, Iran. For Iran, joining the SCO is a huge strategic win. It places Tehran inside a security and economic framework dominated by China and Russia, offering a powerful alternative to Western institutions. It's the backbone of Iran's look to the East policy and a formal acknowledgement of its place in a rising Eurasian bloc. Inside the SCO, Iran is no longer an isolated state but a partner in a club that openly challenges a US-led world. This membership offers real benefits without a formal military treaty with China. Through the SCO's regional anti-terrorist structure, RATS, Iran joins in security exercises and intelligence sharing. For example, in December 2025, Iran hosted its first ever SCO counterterrorism drill, codenamed Sahan 2025, near the city of Tabriz. While a drill of that scale might have limited military impact, its political message was huge, projecting an image of security cooperation with major powers. This platform lets China bolster Iran's security and legitimacy under the banner of regional counterterrorism, all without deploying a single Chinese soldier. The final, and maybe most controversial, pillar of support is technology. China avoids large-scale, direct arms sales to Iran, which would provoke a major crisis with the West. Instead, it provides something just as useful: dual-use components and tech that fuel Iran's own military industry. Dual-use technologies are items with both civilian and military uses, making them tricky to regulate. U.S. authorities have repeatedly found networks operating out of China and Hong Kong that supply critical parts for Iran's military programs. This includes electronics and semiconductors that have ended up in Iranian-made drones used by its regional allies and in the war in Ukraine. For example, U.S. authorities have sanctioned Chinese firms for shipping components for Iran's Shahed series drones. It's not just hardware. In March 2025, the U.S. State Department offered a $15 million reward for information on nationals charged in January 2024 with using front companies to smuggle U.S. origin electronic parts to Iran's Revolutionary Guard for use in drones and missile systems. This quiet, often indirect, flow of technology allows Iran to build up its own impressive arsenal. It's empowerment by proxy. China doesn't need to send its own weapons when it can supply the building blocks for Iran to become a significant military-industrial power on its own. So, what does all this add up to? The 5 bridges China has built to Iran: oil, a strategic pact, diplomatic cover, security integration, and a tech pipeline, create a comprehensive and surprisingly resilient support system. It's a masterclass in projecting power without firing a single shot. For China, the logic is clear. It secures a vital energy source, gains a strategic foothold in the Middle East, and chips away at American dominance, all while carefully managing its risks. For Iran, this support is nothing less than a lifeline. It allows the regime to survive economic strangulation, maintain its regional power, and chase its own strategic goals. This partnership poses a serious challenge to the West, suggesting the era of sanctions as an all-powerful foreign policy tool might be ending. And as these ties deepen, a bigger question emerges. What happens when these economic bridges become strategic highways, creating a new axis of power that operates completely outside the established global order? The answer will likely define geopolitics for years to come. If you found this breakdown insightful, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. And let us know
U.S. aircraft carrier battle group Abraham Lincoln has arrived in the CENTCOM area of responsibility and is now literally just miles away from where it can engage with Iran. In the light of the more American firepower being in the region, Iran remains defiant and the stakes continue to rise. Is there a war coming or is there not? That's the big question here. And to try and settle this and trying to explain what in the world is going on, we have expert Jacques Beau, colonel who's a retired former member of the Swiss Strategic Intelligence Services and former NATO officer, and just incredibly intelligent guy and author of many books, some of which are on the region here. So we're really grateful to have you on. Welcome back to the show, Colonel.
Yeah, thank you for having me back in your show. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks.
Well, listen, let's just take a look right off the top here because there's a lot of firepower. Gary, if you can put that full screen back up there again, this headline, according to the Wall Street Journal this morning, the Lincoln carries F-35 Charlie and F-18 fighter jets, as well as E-8 Growler electronic warfare planes that can jam enemy defenses. The defense official is traveling with 3 Navy destroyers, which are capable of firing Tomahawk cruise missiles. In addition to the warships, the U.S. has deployed F-15E fighter jets to bases in Jordan. It is also moving Patriot and THAAD air defenses into the region on top of what's normally already there to help defend American installations and U.S. partners from Iranian counterattacks, read Israel. Some of the equipment has already moved. More is expected to be in place in 1 or 2 weeks. So this is obviously a substantial buildup. It is not finished yet, but with that aircraft carrier strike group now in the CENTCOM AOR waters and just a little bit of ways from where it can actually launch operations, one has to imagine that the chances of an attack are pretty high. Well, how do you read it?
Well, that's the usual pattern we have before strikes. This is not new. I mean, we have all this combination of electronic warfare and jamming aircraft or devices, the usual destroyers with the Tomahawk capable. So we have the usual pattern. Now, the question is what will be the result of such a strike? And I think that's where we should probably be careful about, because there is in the US, and obviously, as you know, it's not new, there is kind of an obsession regarding Iran since now a couple of decades. And we have seen that last time, that means last year, we had already strikes. Iran didn't want to expand the conflict, so they decide to find a solution by striking in Qatar, so this air base, and warning with a pre-warning to the US before. I'm not sure the Iranians will do the same this time. I mean, again, it depends a little bit on what kind of strikes we have. Last time it was about a nuclear installation. This time, if it's a kind of decapitation strike or something like that, this may prompt for a stronger response from Iran. And this response may come not necessarily against US assets, but against Israeli assets. And that's something this is a kind of scenario that was imagined last year, and that may be the case this time. And the problem is that each time the situation became worse. So we might find a point where the Iranians said, well, now stop. We have the final game, if you want, and the very strong response in order to stop this, because it's a recurring issue. We had several attempts from the US to strike against Iran in the last year. There's always this threat. And the Iranian, at the end of the day, they are a little bit fed up. So we may reach the point where the Iranians say, well, you strike us, we'll reply on Israel or something like that.
Yeah, so and I want to go down that there, because there's a lot of commentators and even in high-ranking American officials or at least high-ranking pundits, that they're saying that Iran won't do that because, quote, they don't want a big war with the United States because, and Jack Keane said this yesterday on U.S. television, because they know that would be the end of the regime. But I want to get a running start into this. I mean, and I'll just pick a date. I could go back further, but we'll just pick a date of, I believe it was in 2024 when Israel destroyed an embassy compound in Syria, an Iranian embassy compound, which ordinarily is an act of war. If you destroy someone's embassy compound, especially of a major power, you can be sure there's going to be a war. There wasn't. Iran took just basically tepid action. And then there was Israel assassinated somebody in one of the Palestinian people during the presidential inauguration in Tehran. That prompted a strike, and there was some retaliation, but it was tepid also. It was signaled, and then that way the United States and Israel were able to shoot down because they wanted to avoid a war. But now then here, when we've seen whether this Hezbollah with Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated, you've had the attempted assassination of Hezbollah negotiators during negotiation times. And then you have like Lindsey Graham, you have Jack Keane, Mike Pompeo, all these guys in the United States emphatically saying regime change, regime change, regime change. We have to kill these guys. And so now then here's this combat power. So you kind of answered this question partially, but looking at all of that lead in here, how might that change the cost benefit calculation for Iran on literally risking a full-on war?
Well, that's it. You know, what you said is exactly the problem. We can see that Iran doesn't want a conflict, and therefore, in all the examples you just mentioned, Iran felt they had to reply or to respond to these attacks, but they always managed to have a very measured response. It was very calculated, very well calibrated, in order to show that they had to respond, but at the same time, they didn't want to trigger a new conflict. The problem is that they are extremely resilient. And you mentioned this consulate in Damascus, but you can go further back to Soleimani in 2020, where also Donald Trump gave the green light to the elimination of this guy. Iran always reacted with extreme measure. Now, the problem is that they see that the Westerners, Israel and the US, don't want to understand the message. Now, if you see what happened last year, once the US and Israel struck against Iran, then Iran launched this 12-day war. And then Israel then asked to stop. And that may be the kind of model the Iranians want to go into. I mean, they say, okay, we don't want to go to war. If you strike once, okay, fine, we'll reply just in a symbolic manner. But if you want to push this further, then we'll reply at full throttle. And we are, I think, in a situation, the more we go in time, the more we are in the situation where the Iranians will feel that this is going nowhere, because nobody wants to understand in the West that Iran is a peaceful country. And I think they are, essentially. Again, I'm not making any judgment on the regime, governance, and all that. That's the problem of the Iranian. But I think as a matter of regional security, Iran is a country that has no history in evading its neighbors. It's a country that is essentially peaceful, but then we try to push them into a situation where they have to react. And there is a point where even in the most resilient country cannot be resilient anymore. It has to show the full power of its capabilities. And that's, again, I think we are moving towards this point. And that's why I find this threat that is currently made by the Trump administration is misguided. Because I think Iran has not demonstrated any willingness to destroy Israel and all that.
Now, one of the things that the United States has said for a long time, and U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz said yesterday on U.S. television, is that Iran is a state sponsor of terror.
This is a state-sponsored massacre. The UN's own figures are saying now up to 18,000, although it looks like it may be far, far worse. President Trump is going to take measured steps in the sense of making sure our bases are protected, making sure Israel is protected against any type of response. We have engaged with our allies and engaged with the region, and we're putting assets in the region for him to be able to make the absolute right decision. But at the end of the day, what is not going to change is the corruption, is the malpractice that has been the Iranian regime. And the second executive order that President Trump put in place was his maximum pressure. And as we see the Iranian economy continue to tank, I don't think the situation is going to get any better for the regime.
So you say you don't agree with that?
No, I don't. Well, first of all, when it comes to terrorism, we have to realize that most of the terrorism we had in the West in the last 25 years was Sunni terrorism. And Iran is a Shia country. And in fact, if you remember, Soleimani had been thanked by the US because it helped the US to destroy some so-called Al-Qaeda cells in Afghanistan. So the only link with so-called terrorism that we may mention about Iran is the Hezbollah. But Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. I know it is designed as such by the US and some countries, but Hezbollah is essentially a resistance organization in Lebanon. It has no intent or no claim over Israeli territory. It has only claim on territory that is still occupied, like the Shaba farms in South Lebanon. There's no claim over Israeli territory and has no intent to act into Israeli territory. In fact, if you look at the map today, you would say this is exactly the opposite. And for his well after the attack on the Beirut U.S. Marine barracks in October 1983. I had some friends in this I mean, not in the U.S. contingent, but in the Italian contingent that was just located to the U.S. barrack, the Italian compound in between, and the Italians were not attacked. In fact, that's also interesting. Nobody mentions that, but why were the Italians not attacked? It's the U.S. Peacekeeping operation. Was it with the Christian militias? Their state and very well. That I was talking about the and the attack was attributed to an organization. Nobody has really understood exactly how large it was. It was kind of an umbrella organization. Nobody could. It was defined as the author of this attack, but it was not Hezbollah. Hezbollah came much later. So the definition of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, in fact, was made at the request of Israel. But beyond this, Iran has never sponsored any terrorist organization that affected the West. And that's something that today we use that as a pretext to bomb Iran. But again, remember that the most of the terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden, ISIS, all that, they were all Sunni organizations. They were not Shia. And in fact, Iran fought against ISIS, against Al-Qaeda and all that, because they also consider this terrorism as an enemy. And
yeah. And it's just ironic because the United States has just said this. The Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, et cetera. It's just been repeated ad nauseum. No one ever worries about validating it because it's not important, because all they're trying to do is get a narrative. So you just saw Mike Waltz here talking about how they're still a big state sponsor of terrorism. Now, he mentioned one thing at the end of that clip. He said, their economy has now tanked, and that has led to a lot of these what they call legitimate protests against their government. And then there was this big crackdown. Now watch, I think this was also yesterday, maybe it was this morning, Jack Keane specifically talking how the justification for using this military force is to protect the people of Iran.
This appears to be a bloodbath that compares to nothing else in terms of the horror that this regime has inflicted on its own people for 45 plus years. If we did nothing, then we're going to send a lifeline to the regime, and it'll help extend the regime. If we try to negotiate with them, that'll do much the same. It legitimizes the regime, and it's a gut punch to the protesters involved here. We have to see the opportunity that's in front of us. A military strike by itself would probably not cause an immediate collapse of the regime, but it will certainly put them on the pathway to it, because, as I indicated before, they've never been so weak. And yes, Iran has the means to retaliate, but they don't want to go to war with the United States. That guarantees them the loss of the regime, despite the bluster of their comments that they're making.
So let me ask you, I'm going to talk about some of the specific things you said there, but I want to zero in on one at first. which is he's saying this strikes may not topple the regime by itself, but it'll put them on a path to destroy the regime. Where is the international authorization or justification or morality or whatever term you want to use that will allow the U.S. to just say, I don't like that regime, so we're going to topple them?
Well, that's exactly what we did in Libya, for instance. And in that case, we even invented, literally, the massacres in Benghazi just to justify the intervention. And the mandate that was given by the Security Council at that time was a mandate to protect civilians. In order, the idea was to have some kind of no-fly zone over Libya so that Libyan Air Force could not bomb civilians. But eventually, we have seen that the West has, in fact, supported rebels, in fact, supported a rebellion and even a revolution. And the name of the game was, in fact, to have a regime change by force. So the Westerners, in fact, hijacked the UN Security Council mandate. I remember because I was at the UN at that time. I was the chief of policy and doctrine of the peacekeeping operation in the UN at that time. And since we contemplated the idea of having a peacekeeping operation in Libya, we monitored the situation extremely closely in order to see exactly what was going on. So I followed that very closely. And in fact, the Westerners, especially France, mainly France, in fact, because at the beginning, the US was not even very enthusiastic about the idea, but the French and the Brits were, in fact, the leaders, those who started the whole thing and convinced the US to join the fight. But at the end, it was a regime change operation. And we have exactly the same pattern here. I don't understand how we can reconcile the idea of protecting population by bombing a country. This is, for me, this is something that I cannot understand.
And listen, it gets even worse than that, in my view, because they're talking about, both Waltz and Keane and many others in the administration are talking about, these protesters. Trump himself, encouraged them to rise up against their country and keep going, help us on the way, he said, right? But then you look at what happened here. So U.S. sanctions have intentionally led to this. Gary, if you can put that first full screen up on there. This is what has happened in the United States. We have helped cripple the lives of the Ukrainians that Trump says he wants to help by the U.S. sanctions. You had, in terms of the people rising up, the way we want to characterize this, the way that Jack Keane wants to characterize this uprising is that it's organic. It came out of nowhere because the mullahs can't provide for good economy, and so the people are getting upset, and then all of a sudden here comes this big overwhelming response that killed a lot of them. But we also have Mike Pompeo, who just a couple of weeks ago said, hey, Happy New Year to the Iranians and Mossad agents beside them. So admitting openly that the United States, and for Israel in this case, but most certainly the CIA, probably the MI6, were actively trying to encourage the uprising. There's all these issues of like 40,000 Starlink terminals that were found. God only knows how many are actually that were not found, etc. So we're trying to cause problems for the Iranian people, make them protest. Then we come in and enable them to protest. And then when the regime responds, we use that as justification for our people to say we now have to go in to protect them. I mean, that seems pretty transparent to me. And you just mentioned we did it in Libya, and you can probably add in a bunch of other places on top of that. Is that going to always work, do you think?
Well, this shows exactly the bad faith in which we act. I mean, in some cases you had in Haiti or so, you had also trouble and the police was not able to cope with the troubles. So you had some countries sending some anti-riot police to help Haitian authorities to deal with the situation. We could do the same with Iran. We could propose to have some anti-riot police units to help them, but it's not what we do. We go directly to the hard the hard solution. We should bomb them. We should have a regime change. We should kill the leaders. And so, in fact, we don't. It's not about the population. There's nothing to do with that. The sanctions are here, and the aim of sanctions, generally speaking, not just for Iran, even that applies to Russia as well, by the way. The idea of sanctions is to create a situation in which the population has to rebel against the government, because they say, well, we cannot live under these circumstances, so we want to have another government. We want to have a government that is not sanctioned. We have a government that is in compliance with the West and things like this. And so sanctions are a tool for interference in domestic policy in order to provoke discontent and provoke ultimately the basis for some kind of regime change. This is the aim of the sanctions, generally speaking. Now, in Iran and in most countries where we apply sanctions, we have made the life of the people impossible. And that's where we have a contradiction, because we made the life for those people impossible. So those people leave their country and they come to our countries. So now you have a problem in the US, as we have in Europe, by the way, with immigration. Who are those immigrants? These are people who are either political opponent in some countries, or people who cannot live in their country because the economic situation doesn't allow it. So they come to Europe. So we increase our immigration problem, and look at the statistic of where the immigrants come from in Europe. I don't know about the US. And obviously you have Latin America that makes the situation slightly different. But if you look at Europe, where do most of the migrants come from? Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, North Africa, and you have probably a couple from Albania or so. But most of the people come from the region we have destabilized before. As a result, we create the situation for regime change, for instability, for uprisings, and so on and so forth. And the direct result is that you have chaos in the country. But the secondary result is that people cannot live in that country and come as migrants in our country. And then you have people complaining because we have too many Muslims, we have too many extremists, because most of the people who come, for instance, of Syria. That's exactly the problem you have in Sweden today. They received all the those who rebelled against Bashar al-Assad. Who were those guys? Islamists, essentially, who fought against Bashar al-Assad, and Sunni Islamists, exactly those who, in fact, were into Jabhat al-Nusra and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or all these movements more or less close to ISIS and so on. Those people are those who emigrate towards Sweden. Sweden welcomed those who opposed Bashar al-Assad. The problem, these guys were the good guys. They were bad guys. And today, what happens? Sweden tried to get rid from all these immigrants because they just create chaos in Sweden. So
you have a similar situation here, even in the United States, with now all of a sudden the administration wants to get rid of all the Afghan people that we brought over. So where did that come from? Let me ask you two questions. Number one, if we engage and make this an attempt for a regime change operation, militarily, do you think that it will succeed? And then separately, I'm going to ask you, if it did succeed, what would be the result? But first of all, on the military side, do you think with the combat power that I just outlaid there, and whatever may come from Israel as well, is that enough to destroy the regime without any boots on the ground?
Well, it's very hard to say, and you probably you may kill some dignitaries or things like that, maybe some mullahs, ayatollahs, or whoever. The problem is, what comes next? You see, this is exactly the same thing as those people who say, well, we don't want to have Putin in Moscow. But who should replace Putin? If you look at the configuration, you usually have people who are even more extreme than in that case, Vladimir Putin is. And I don't know in Iran exactly. I'm not familiar with all the details of and the constellation of these of the domestic policy there, of politics there. But I can assume that you may probably have someone who is even more aggressive against Israel as an example. So I don't understand why changing the regime in Iran will improve things in the Middle East. That will probably satisfy Lindsey Graham and all these kind of people, the Pompeo, Mike Pompeo, and others. But beyond that, what is the benefit? Again, I because we don't know who will be next, and it's probably not the Prince Shah Pahlavi. He's not very popular in Iran. His father has not left good memories, in fact. So I'm not sure this guy could have any chance to be a legitimate chief of state in Iran. But again, it's an open question, but I doubt. In any case, we are gambling here. We are gambling because we don't know who comes next. So what is the benefit of changing those regimes? Why couldn't we have good relation with those people, and through good relation, probably to shape their governance, to help them to have a better governance? Again, I'm not living in Iran. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the life in Iran. I'm not aware of all the details of the whole governance is performed there. But assuming it's bad governance, the best way to help them is to have good relation with them, and trying through good relations to advise them, to help them to find the right way if we think it can help them.
Yeah,
but
that would be better.
The purpose of war for that.
Yeah, because people don't want to give any thought, because that's hard work, what you described. People are looking for easy buttons and then just be done with it.
That's not leading to a solution. You see,
it's not. But the actual solution is hard work, and we don't want to do it. I mean, it's that simple.
I agree.
Last question on this topic here. Let's see. About a week or so ago, maybe 10 days, President Trump was asked, hey, the Ayatollah and the IRGC commander both said that if you attack, that they're going to hit a bunch of American bases in the region. What do you think of that? And is that a reason not to attack them? And he said, oh, they said that last time too, in June of last year, and they didn't do it. And they won't do it again this time either, because they know, like Jack Keane just said, they know that if that happens, then it will be the complete destruction, and then we'll go in full scale. But let me ask you, kind of circling back to where you started, do you think that Iran may have gotten to the point where, because of all of that baggage and all those attacks that came with a moderate response before, that they may say, you know what, we're willing to take that risk? What chance do you think that they, if we go in with a big strike here, that they actually will make good on this, both in Israel and against the U.S. and the region?
Well, I think the Iranians will try to avoid any full-fledged war against the U.S. That's certainly true. And that's a reason why I said in their response, they may respond against Israel. Because, and certainly the US can support Israel, can bomb Iran for Israel, but I'm not sure that the US would go into a full-fledged war just for the sake of Israel. It may help Israel, but probably not to the point of being directly involved in a full war. So for that reason, I think Iran may answer on some Israel, and since Israel has been involved in those troubles that we have seen recently, and Mike Pompeo just said it, in fact, with those Mossad agents, so it could be a possible strategy from Iran to respond by hitting some military targets in Israel, and keeping thus some ability to escalate the conflict. And
let me ask one more question. Yeah. To what extent do you think Iran may or may not have seen what happened with the Houthis in the Red Sea with the United States last year. We went in with these big proclamations. We were going to crush Houthis. We were going to destroy them. We were going to open the Red Sea. And after about a month, we said, yeah, this is done. We're not, and we left, and we just went on. Is there any lessons that Iran might learn?
Well, certainly, but there is also a big difference. Iran, for some reason, has become, since, as I said before, has become in the U.S. mind as an obsession. Regardless, I mean, the Houthis are just a side dish, if you want. But Iran has always been, for the U.S., a main target. It's just because they had other priority targets before that they didn't attack Iran, and Iran would be quite a substantial enemy if they want to go there. I'm not sure you can really win a war without having boots on the ground in Iran. And if you do have boots on the ground in Iran, then that would be an extremely hard fight, because Iranians are much more motivated than the Iraqi were, probably much better organized than the Iraqi were. They are probably much better armed, better equipped, and probably even, and the terrain is even more difficult than it used to be in Iraq, meaning that if the US wants to engage in a war with Iran, decapitation strike or some limited strike is certainly obviously possible. But going into full-fledged war or going into it becomes extremely difficult. And in that situation, by the way, the US, even if it has the Navy in the neighborhood, it will still become extremely difficult to bring in Iran a strike force, I mean a land force that is able to fight with Iran. On the contrary, Iran can very quickly destroy completely Israel. So Israel has put itself into a situation where it becomes kind of a pawn for the Iranians. And that's probably the situation that the US will face. They will not have a full-fledged war with Iran, but Israel may be completely destroyed by this. And what can the US do? Nothing, or not much. They can probably bring a lot of destruction in Iran. They can probably target a lot of people and kill a lot of people, but they will eventually not have a complete win as they did in Iraq, even if, again, the win in Iraq is also something that you can debate, but it's another situation.
Dan, you have to open up your mic.
Sorry about that. That's actually a pretty bold statement also that you made there, that Iran could destroy Israel. It's not just like what happened in last year where they were able to cause some damage, but you actually suggested that they could destroy them. Can you explain that?
Well, just look at the Israel. I mean, it's a very small country, and we know that Iran has not engaged its full force when it retaliated last year. And it retaliated with a very calibrated response. And they said, and I can believe that, there were probably some rhetoric and probably some propaganda in that, but nevertheless, I would think that the Iranians are probably not bluffing when they say that if they wanted to destroy large cities in Israel and all that, they could do it. And just with the calibrated response they had last year, I don't have all the figures here because obviously I looked at it last year and I don't have all the figures in my mind. But the impact of those strikes, I mean, those missile strikes on Israel was significant on the population. There had a lot of people who managed to flee the country, and they flew away. And it would be very easy if the Iranian wanted to have probably not it's not that they would destroy Israel like Israel has done in Gaza, for instance, but they could certainly damage the economic centers, big companies, industries, manufacturing plants, and things like that. The
If
economic
it got bad
center.
enough, do you think that that Israel would consider resorting to nuclear weapons?
Well, that could be something. That could probably be something. But again, Dimona and all these places will probably be the first target also. And again, this issue was raised also last year, that people said, well, Israel could retaliate. But I'm not sure Israel can retaliate with missile. They need to have aircraft to do that. Obviously, the aircraft can take off from other places than just in Israel, but you have a finite number of airfields in Israel. So if you have that in a first strike, you reduce significantly the ability for Israel to respond by bombing. Again, I'm not saying that it's a safe answer for Iran, but it just indicates that then we would raise into we would escalate the conflict in a situation where the US wanted just to have a kind of a regime change or a decapitation strike or something like that, probably even more than this. But the reply might be much more devastating than the initial strike. So, and that's part of dissuasion. This is in fact deterrence. In fact, that's deterrence. This is a deterrence policy. If you strike us, we will receive the full amount of missile we have. And of course, they cannot reach the US. They can probably not even destroy the whole US Navy in the Persian Gulf or things like that. But they can certainly destroy a large part of Israel. So that's why I was
and of course, not to mention even the Strait of Hormuz, and so it could get really, really ugly. And so that is strong reason why we should avoid even starting this, because we can't finish it in a way that's beneficial to our side. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Listen, in the time we have left, I'd like to shift gears back over to Europe. I don't want to miss an opportunity to get your view on some of these things where you're such a subject matter expert. I want to start off with Greenland, because I think Greenland and the issues between Russia and Ukraine and trying to get that war solved are kind of connected. And the mentality is a problem. I think some of the problems that we just identified with our attitudes and our thoughts and our beliefs towards Iran may also imply into even Europe. So I want to start off here, first of all, with the U.S. ambassador, former U.S. ambassador to Denmark, who was asked about the issue with Greenland and whether or not Trump's going to take it. And notice the interesting part of her first part of her answer here, which almost seems like she's making the case for Denmark is really in a good position.
They've wanted us to take care of them more or less so that they can put their taxpayer funds into really lavish social welfare programs like free college, free healthcare, free childcare. And they pay a lot of taxes, but the Danish citizens expect a lot back. So the prime minister there is actually doing what her citizens want her to do. She's making, she's putting Denmark first. She's not putting Greenland first. And in fact, when I was the ambassador, there were 30 Danish soldiers and 2 dog sled teams. And that's what Denmark considered to be adequate security. What the current premier of Greenland is talking about is concessions. So they are going to want money, and they're going to want concessions from the U.S. government, and so will Denmark, in order for the U.S. to do anything. And there is the problem. If there's always a tripartite discussion and it's hard for us to get our bases where we want, and it has a lot of friction rather than the U.S. being able to secure the area, I think it's going to be a problem for President Trump. I think he wants to be sure that we have Greenland so that it can be part of the Golden Dome and it doesn't fall into Russian or Chinese hands.
Now, I want to look at several of those parts, especially the last one here. But what do you make of this argument that Denmark is looking out for its people first, Greenland's looking out for its people first, and all these things have been the case for a long time. But now Trump is coming and saying he's looking out for his people, which is that we have to, quote, have Greenland. Do you think that there's strategic reason for the United States to require to have Greenland for its security?
Well, first of all, when you talk about security, and that applies to other places of the world as well, the best way is to have good relation with people. I mean, so far in during the whole Cold War, the U.S. managed to have security on the North Atlantic through good relations with Denmark, with, in fact, NATO. You have this part of the Atlantic that is between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK, which in intelligence jargon is called the GUK. G for Greenland, I for Iceland, UK for UK, Duke. And that's the space where the US had a lot of concern during the Cold War, because that's the place where you could have Soviet and today Russian nuclear submarines to enter the North Atlantic. And by the way, that these are the place where the US deployed the so-called SOSUS. This is this submarine sensors network that you have in the whole North Atlantic that detect all the submarines, can locate Soviet submarines and things like that. So this issue is not new. It's a very old issue that the US managed to cope with through good relation with Denmark. How come this cannot be continued? I mean, Denmark has always been a faithful ally of the US. Denmark is a very old member of the NATO. So what is the point? I'm not sure exactly what the Greenland could add to the security of the US in military terms.
Well, now, what do you make of the specific claim that both Trump and J.D. Vance have issued lately, that if we don't take Greenland, China and Russia will? Can Russia and China take Greenland?
Well, they never expressed the intent to do that. I mean, we see that Russia has so many problems with Ukraine. Do you think they want now to change their mind and go to Greenland? And this is just a kind of a pretext. The same with China. I mean, why would China start to China has no history of taking land, especially land that is extremely far away. I mean, we had the experience in China that they took some atolls and things like that in the neighborhood. I mean, they managed to take some reefs and build some unsinkable aircraft carriers on those reefs and things like this. That's okay, but going so far away in Greenland, I mean, I'm sure that China could be probably interested in Greenland, but then it would certainly not come militarily. It would probably come with companies to have some ability to mine for mining, some strategic minerals or things like that. But I don't see a military threat. The problem of this threat is, in fact, that the Danish intelligence, in its report, its annual report that it was published in last December, or November, or anyway, I think it was December, early December. In any case, in their assessment, they mentioned that Greenland could be threatened by China and Russia, and that's exactly what the Trump administration took as a pretext to say, well, if it can be taken by Russia or China, then we have to go first. I mean, to preempt such a Chinese or Russian action. And in fact, it's a poor assessment from the Danish intelligence, because I don't see any rationale for that. The Chinese have, in fact, enough strategic material. This is one of the richest country in the world in terms of rare earth and strategic minerals and things like that. Yeah. Same for Russia. Russia has already most of the Arctic maritime lines. So I don't see.
They would have no need. Yeah,
it would add much to Russia. So this was a poor assessment by the Danish intelligence, and that was just misused by the Trump administration to justify the action. And we have to remember that this idea of having Greenland is a very old idea in the US. Already in the 19th century, the US had in mind to buy Greenland, at the time where the US got Alaska and Louisiana. I mean, they got Alaska from the Russians, it got Louisiana from the French, and it got Texas and I'm not exactly sure, or New Mexico, things like that.
From California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas.
Exactly. So this was an old dream from the US to be able to buy this. And there have been about 5 or 6 attempts before the last one in the late 19th century. During the first half of the 20th century, the US tried several times to buy Greenland. So it's not new, in fact.
It's not new, but there's a reason why we never completed, because it never made complete sense. When you looked at the cost and the benefit, it just didn't make sense, and it still doesn't. Now, you mentioned a second ago that what we're talking about as far as Russia or China and Greenland is nothing more than a pretext. There's no logical fear in that. At the same time, we're actually talking about things regarding Europe and to taking something that we want, which is causing problems. Now, you mentioned also a second ago that one of the best ways that the United States has maintained transatlantic relationship has been good relations. Well, now then we're turning things upside down and angering many in Europe. And so now then the question is that many are starting to ask now is NATO sacrosanct anymore, or is it a dead man walking, as Colonel Doug McGregor has said on the show several times. And earlier today, Professor Michael Clark in the UK had his own little Michael's map, as he called it, to talk about what he sees happening potentially to NATO.
I think that NATO is on the verge now of an evolution. It will still exist as an alliance, but it may be an alliance which looks like 3 different groups of states. One group of states in the dark blue will be, I think, the militarily serious states of NATO. So we're talking about the northern states, the Scandinavians, the Baltic states, the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, Poland, Canada. And those states, I think, will look a bit like the old NATO of the 1950s and 1960s. The other states in NATO, those in the light blue, have different concerns. They're more Mediterranean-based. They're more worried about different things. And so these states will be much more equivocal about the military threat from Russia and what they do about it. And then, of course, what about this one, the United States? The question is that an Article 5 commitment state anymore?
So what do you think about that? I mean, just in the evolutionary period, which is tantamount to potentially really change it, definitely would be changing the unity of NATO, that there are 3 kind of general groupings. How do you see that?
Well, this is a point of view. I mean, there is a rationale, and why not? The point here is something that I have mentioned a couple of times, and in fact, the Russians are mentioning that also, is that NATO is no longer adapted to the situation we had since the end of the Cold War. NATO was in reality built around the nuclear capabilities of the US. NATO, in fact, is a way to put all European countries under US nuclear umbrella. That's the purpose of NATO. So NATO has a sense as a nuclear power, if you want, or when it comes to nuclear war, or the possibility of nuclear war. When it comes to conflicts that are below the nuclear level, then NATO is no longer really adapted to that, because you may or may not have the commitment of the US. And that's where this was the one of the main criticism of the Russians. And that's also something, I mean, the Russians have their mind, I have mine, but having been 5 years into NATO and having some friend of mine who are working within NATO to the future of NATO, I had many discussions on that. And there are already discussions, I mean, there were already discussions within NATO as to what should NATO be today. because we see that, and we talk about the example of Ukraine, for instance, we see that we cannot engage NATO because NATO means nuclear war. So in a certain sense, even if NATO is not ready for that because of the peace dividend and all that, but beyond this, the problem is NATO is a nuclear organization. And that's something that Jens Stoltenberg, the former General Secretary, repeated many times. NATO is a nuclear power. So it's too strong, or it is configured as a power that is not adjusted to small scale conflict. I mean, sorry to say that Ukraine is small scale. It's not small scale for those who are living in the conflict, but it's
Right.
it's a subcontinental. It's a theater of operations. It's not. I mean, that's the reason why the Russians call it military operations, because for them it's a territorial operation. In any case, we see that NATO is too strong for that, because we see that we cannot go nuclear for that. And that requires a new thinking of how we want to configure European defense for smaller conflicts than just a nuclear war.
Now,
that's
there's
exactly
an interesting, there's an interesting observation out of Germany today, actually, from General Ben Hodges. Now, often we show him on this channel and we talk about how some of the stuff he says is just detached from reality. In this particular case, though, I think he might have a point when he's talking about what Europe needs to do for its own security.
Europe can provide, if they got serious about it, almost everything except, thousands of nuclear weapons. All the other stuff, it's a matter of priority and political will. And I'm a little weary of listening to Europeans say, "Oh, we can't afford it. It'll take too long." Well, get on with it.
Get on with it if it is. I mean, that makes sense to me. That's what Europe should do for its own national security. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, that's exactly what Hegseth told the Europeans in February last year, when he was talking to European of NATO. He was saying, now we need to have a kind of a division of labor, and the Europeans should take over the defense of Europe, because it's a reality. And the issue of burden sharing is something I'm hearing about since the 70s. And when I entered the intelligence, we're already talking about burden sharing, because at that time, of course, it was the issue that, in fact, the US was taking much of the burden of the defense of Europe already at that time, even if European armies were much more consistent as they are today. The problem is that with the so-called peace dividends, the Europeans understood that they could set their priorities differently. They understood that the war in Europe was unlikely, and therefore they reduced their defense spending to the minimum. And the result is that today you have armies with almost nothing in that. The US continued to fund, finance, and develop a significant military instrument. And in fact, the Europeans relied on the European capabilities to defend Europe. And in a certain sense, Trump is right when he says, well, guys, so far you have profited from the US capabilities and for our money, because we've paid for the defense of Europe. Now it's your turn to take over your own defense, and we can concentrate on other theaters, such as the Pacific area. It makes sense, and it's true that in Europe, because also the structure of the government spending is very different from the one you have in the US. In European countries, depending on a country, but by and large, European countries spend much more on social security and things like that. And that's the reason why after the end of the Cold War, we could reduce our defense spending in order to improve social security, welfare, and things like that. Now, and you may remember that last year, Mark Rutte said to the NATO members, he said, well, we spend too much on social matters and social welfare and all that. We have to reduce that in order to increase defense. Now, the problem is that defense, and when we talk about security policy at large, a security policy is based on two things. It's based on your foreign policy and your defense policy. If you don't have a strong foreign policy, if you have enemies all around you, then you need to have a very strong defense. But you can see the security policy differently. You can say, okay, I don't have the means and the defense capabilities, but I want to develop my foreign policy in order to improve my relationships with my neighbors, so people don't want to attack me. I put it very simply. And the problem is that today Europe finds itself exactly in the situation that Europe is surrounded by enemies. It obviously it doesn't talk to Russia. It doesn't. Europe doesn't talk to China, and now Europe is at odds with the U.S. So that means that Europe is now trapped in a kind of a strategic void, if you want, because they never thought about their security policy in global terms. They didn't want to talk to the Russians as an example, and now they feel they are threatened by the Russians, but they don't have the resources to build a strong defense against Russia. So they are trapped, and that's where you see in Europe you have a very strong strategic deficit in that, because they are not able to understand the complexity of a security policy, to that security policy. And that's what I said before about the US and Denmark. If you want a good security, then the easiest way, the cheapest way, and the most effective way is to have good relationship with your friends. That's all.
It does. And I hope that people will finally come to that realization instead of going down a more destructive path that won't provide that kind of security. Listen, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing a lot of these views. But before we let you go, I want to know if you can kind of give us an update on what's the situation with these ridiculous sanctions that have been put on you, and has
also going to do two main topics for you. I am working on it. One has to do with China and one has to do with Cuba. So for China, that will be one of the headlines I am going to be sharing with you here. This is not this one, rather this one here. This is an image of General Zhang Jua. I hope I pronounced it correctly. My apologies if I don't. This is the former vice chair of the China Central Military Commission, CMC. He was packing up to leave at a meeting during the annual 2 sessions that took place in Beijing, March 2025. So what's going on with this particular individual? He has been investigated right now for some other issues, which I'm going to do a video for you. I'm not going to get ahead of myself of this. So, and because he's considered one of the top generals and one of President Xi Jinping's closest allies. Here is the thing that I'm going to tell you. And I was made aware of this about 2.5 months ago. Didn't want to talk about it. The reason I didn't want to talk about it, because I wasn't 100% sure of the reasons for why the investigation was launched. what I was aware of, what I can tell you I was aware of the tensions between him and other general, which I will be talking about too when I do the video for you, and President Xi Jinping. But I didn't want to come forward with that till I ensure that, as I always do with you, with the community, I like to fact and double check information to make sure it is as accurate. But now it is confirmed, and I checked from different resources from within Beijing itself, that indeed he and another one has been removed and under investigations in other 6 other officers, to my knowledge. So, and as I said, the other topic I will do for you is Cuba. Yeah, that is something, developments took place on a weekend. I will do a live stream for you about that. So now let's get into our topic of the day. And today we will be talking about, of course, the brink of escalation. That's how I decided to put the title for the thumbnail, to highlight you. Will Iran be able to outsmart the United movie before? We've seen how the US sits military muscles only to find out that it doesn't hold. The best example is what took place against Ansarullah or Houthis in Red Sea. But better yet, historically speaking, and I'm going to be providing you facts about this because I was on the ground in Afghanistan. You remember? We did the same by launching fighter jets and all that stuff to kill the head of the Taliban, and we couldn't, because we were hoping he will surrender, and it didn't work. Could Iran adopt the similar way? And this is again why I wanted to address this particular analysis for you, because whether the US is bluffing or not, especially under President Trump, it's a subject now of some sort of intense debate, because you have many geopolitical analysts who have some sort of an in-depth understanding of how things work. They are split up between, I'm one of those now seeing, okay, is this tactic of the US just a calculated maneuver? A high stake brinksmanship, some will argue, on the counter argument to that, or is it just an erratic, empty threats? We've seen it before. And this is why when you consider the idea of, not the idea, but rather the statement of Donald Trump said about annexing Greenland, which turns out to be nothing but a noise or just a desperate distraction, no more, no less. And this is where you have this back and forth among analysts that they contend with his actions as just noise, no more, no less. Because when you consider where Donald Trump is making the noise on 2 things, trade wars and military threats. On the other hand, you cannot minimize this as just a bluffing, because what if? And this is exactly where we ask the first fundamental question. What is the objective of the American buildup in the West Asia or Middle East, categorized? Why? And why it is categorized as unprecedented? This is a picture of the USS Abraham Lincoln. And I'll give credit here, not to this one here. I give credit to the US Navy. That's their picture here. So you think about this particular buildup and what's in it. And I'm going to detail for you what's involved in this. So as of now, what the region of the West Asia or Middle East is witnessing is some sort of this unprecedented operational and strategic situation. There are 2 going hand in hand. And this, of course, it comes against the background of the escalating American military buildup, and of course the expansion of the deployments and so forth. Remember, just by bringing this to the Arabian Sea, you bring in an additional 7,000 US troops, in addition to the 40,000 that exist in the region. And of course, we're going to have to think in terms of where how Iran sees this. And by the way, I thank you to the community for those who participated in the survey when I asked the question, with the ongoing military buildup in West Asia, has war become now Iran's only option? 76% of you said yes, 16% of you said no, and 8% of you say don't know. And I appreciate you participating in this. We had about almost 1,700 participating on this. So the American mobilization goals, because when you have sort of military readiness level reaching this level here, we didn't see the same in Venezuela. Do you remember? And I argued back then, you're not going to see any ground forces going in or even an invasion of, because the numbers don't support that. 10,000, it's not enough. Are we seeing this? Are we seeing the opposite of that here? And this is where me looking from outside in, I will look at this first as a maximum of that the US is doing to Iran. But at the same time, this could turn into potential escalation. And that escalation, where my fear is, can go beyond the framework of deterrence, because the whole reason the US is doing this is nothing but a deterrence. Because why it will be, it will go beyond, because if it fails, this so-called deterrence fails to impose a new political equation on the other side, which what I believe it will not succeed in doing so. So the buildup in itself, the military buildup with all the US assets and so forth, it's sort of helps us at least understand that any future offensive, it will be at least prepared. But it could also be perceived in terms of as a defensive measure, because you are not going to underestimate Iran. You can underestimate anyone in a fight. So, especially now when it comes down to Iran in West Asia. So, because the military presence. So, is it about the US or is it about defending Israel? And of course, protecting US forces in the region. And one will say it's for both. So if we look at the scale and the context of this and compare it to what we saw in 2025. So here is the harsh reality. As of the last event that took place in June 2025, there are about 40,000 service members in West Asia. So many of them are on ships at sea. There are troops on the ground in Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. You know, those are especially in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, those are small units. But there is military presence on the ground. Of course, those countries is not going to want to disclose this to their populations. So when you look at the buildup, that includes now the deployments of the carrier strike groups. That's the Abraham Lincoln, the aerial refueling aircrafts, you know, the transport planes, all this. This to me looks not only from a military perspective, but also from a strategic aspects on it. And this, I will not treat it as a routine. If it were a routine, you don't need this many or this many assets. Because the way I see it is that Washington wants to send the message that it wants an immediate ability to subdue not just Iran, but the entire theater in the region, which is not going to work anyway. Of course, the clear focus remain on Iran as the central target for this particular mobilization. So when you think about the nature for the deployed forces, you know, especially, let me put the picture once again, especially the USS Abraham Lincoln, which, by the way, represents some sort of a floating air and naval base. And that in itself allows for the targeting of the entire Iranian territory and any other target from within. So, of course, why would you want to do this if you are the United States? Of course, you want to confuse the calculations of escalation, to leave a blurry picture to the opposite side as to what might happen. But at the same time, this, in my opinion, pushes towards an open path for confrontation. This is why I believe Iran this time around will have no other option, in my opinion. So, and this, to analyze it this way, it will have to be based on this sort of the aspects of this accelerated US military moves. So when you move, for example, the transfer of the squadron of F-15 Eagle strike fighters, you move it from Bahrain, from Britain, I'm sorry, from the UK into the West Asia or Middle East. When you move the supporting refueling aircraft, when you move the military cargo planes, all this, in my opinion, reflects some sort of a wide-ranging operational readiness. But again, is it for action or is it just for flexing and posturing? So, and this is, again, where you have to think in terms of the size of the mobilization. Yeah, we can all say the US did it before, and we did. You remember last year when we were talking about the Red Sea and the US sent the Harry Truman? All we thought, oh my gosh, they sent in this one, and they end up having to flee. And I use the term very carefully here. Yeah, they end up having to flee north under the pretext is that the aircraft carrier needed some maintenance. There was no maintenance on that. So. And this is why in this scenario, what you're going to have the inability of the opposite party, Iran in this case, its inability to predict the outcome. But there is also another reason to all this. As of now, there is no clear stated political objective to all this. That in itself leaves the door wide to many interpretations. So because military power, however great it is, or it might be, it's only a tool. That's the only reason for it. And that cannot be replaced, the ultimate or the objective goal for why this is all had to happen. So, and this is exactly where you are seeing, the contingencies now that Iran will have to embark on. And I am going to detail for you as to what Iran has in the cards that it can play. So when you think about in terms of this idea of this movement, and again, I am finding myself going back to history and thinking in terms of this buildup is described as unprecedented, but in scale relative to recent history as to what took place. Yet the exact objective shift. It depends again. Why it shifts is because the regional tensions tends not to stay constant. Because Iran-Israel dynamics are shifting on a daily basis. And this is where I use history as my guide, thinking that this ambiguity is compounded by the fact that past experiences, and that's why you have to always go back in history and see if there is any precedent to something like this. So past experiences have shown that the United States has repeatedly resorted to sort of display of force without engaging in a direct confrontation. And that in itself leaves the current scenario open between options of some sort of cohesive or coercive, rather, strategies, deterrence, or the option of sliding into a war with no clear limits or objectives. And that is one of the greatest concern about this in itself. So the amassing of this massive number of forces is in itself part of the battle, if I am to argue that point. Because why you want to do this? You want to do this to force the opponent to rethink its strategy, to go back to the drawing board and reshape the calculations, and pushing the opponents to modify its strategy, its behavior, its response. And all this is done without firing a single shot. But again, we can't be thinking in these terms just this way. We have to consider the risks involved with this type of a strategy. So, because here is the thing, the objective of this strategy is to achieve something. But if there is a failure, that changes the entire nature of the setting. So the deployed force, like what we are seeing right now, will become ready for use in case there is some sort of a miscalculation. And that in itself will open up a door to a gradual escalation that is very, very difficult to contain, especially when it comes down to dealing with Iran. And that's, again, why I'm saying you have to put this into the context. When you see in this massive movements of Iran's deployments of certain types of missiles, all this coincided with this heavy US naval presence in the Gulf and the Arabian Sea. You know, when you see destroyers, you see warships, permanent bases, and so forth. So, the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, which, by the way, will become a target for Iran, will become a target of Iranian missiles. Al-Udeid base in Qatar will become, locations in Saudi Arabia will become targets as well. I don't know about Egypt and Jordan. That's so small. It doesn't make sense to waste missiles on those. And that in itself, the setting complicates now the theater of operation. And the asymmetric stuff. So when you think asymmetric warfare consists of some sort of different strategies, and this is nothing new. Iran has been working on this for a long time. During the time of Qasem Soleimani, who, by the way, credited for creating some sort of a really good strategy for Iran in the region. This is why it has geopolitical upper hand in the region than the United States of the US. Because this strategy that Iran developed it over decades. But what Iran has, combined this with the unconventional tactics. Then you add the modern capabilities also. And I'm not denying all this, because remember, we don't know what the Russians and Chinese are doing behind the scenes in supporting Iran. Iran will not come forward and disclose that. Don't ever expect that. Let's start first with Iran's naval asymmetric warfare. I don't know if you're familiar with swarm boats. Let me see if I have a picture for you. No, I don't. Sorry, I don't have a picture. But anyway, swarm boats. What are they? Those are small unmanned surface vehicles, and those are designed to operate autonomous. I can't even speak. Or via a remote control, coordinated. This is what Iran, Mind you, one thing is that those can be equipped with multi-rocket launchers and heavy machine guns. Then you add to this Iran's special operation forces. Includes about, to my knowledge, about 1,500 special operations teams, which is deployed throughout the Persian Gulf. I didn't say throughout Iran. I said through, and that can attack targets below the surface, above the surface, from the air, from the shore, using specific equipment. For example, lines. I don't know how many of you, and I'm not going to get into the details of all this or technical aspects of it. You have the shaped explosives charges. You have submersible delivery vehicles. And this is exactly Iran outsmarted the United States. We've seen in Afghanistan with the US military defeat. We've seen it in the Red Sea with, again, aircraft carrier, fighter jets, and all. They couldn't defeat Ansarullah. We've seen it in Somalia, you know. And that's, again, you have to think in terms of Iran's greater strategy. And the greater strategy goes way back into the early 80s. This is where you have the groups. Yeah, some would say, well, are you talking about Hezbollah, Dr. El? Yes, I am. But they are not in a position. We don't know that for a fact. Just because certain groups don't react doesn't mean they're done. Have you ever heard anything about the Houthis recently? No. You're taking a step back, watching from a distance, and when time comes, they will get reactivated or do whatever. My point is that these groups, like, for example, Hezbollah, like Badr Corps, which is in Iraq, all this just as an example, all this was intended when it was established at some point to challenge the military superior foes or enemies, whatever term you want to use. And this is, again, what the Iraq-Iran war has taught the Iranians. They learned big deal from that. And that's, again, where the importance of it. Then you bring in the new technology. I'm talking about the missiles. I'm talking about the drones capabilities that Iran has. And I'm going to detail some of the examples of these missiles you are looking at here, so to know exactly what it's for. Iran has deployed advanced cruise missiles now. For example, you take Qadr 380. Qadr 380, I'm going to leave the picture here for you so you can see. Qadr 380 has a range of about 1,000 kilometers. And here's the interesting thing about it. It's using AI. So you think about the Shahid 136, not Shahid. Matt Backy, thank you for correcting me last time. It's just because when I read the translation, it was spelled as Shahid. Shahid means martyr, Shahid. 136. So, and Iran has mass-produced also guided munition capabilities. So this is when you consider the idea what is known as the gray zone activities in terms, to those who are familiar with military setting, the gray zone actors are usually conducting activities that fall between diplomacy and open war. And this is where Iran is going to be playing. To me, it's a smart strategy to move in that direction. But this time around, Iran is put really under the real test, because it's now or never. If Iran doesn't respond, in case the United States attacks, then it's over. This is why the US is rethinking and rethinking and rethinking. Of course, Israel wants the US to go ahead forward with this. And that's when you have to consider some sort of the, what am I looking for? The balance of power. Of course, when you look at it logistically, the US has far more superiority to Iran, but that doesn't guarantee victory. History proved it. Go to Vietnam, Gulf I, Gulf II, Afghanistan, Iraq, Red Sea, doesn't guarantee. So because Iran, beside the whatever conventional weapons it has the geopolitical power element. And that in itself plays a major role in moving the trajectory of the conflict one direction or another. So, because what am I referring to here is I am referring specifically to the Iran's influential position on the security of maritime routes, especially the Strait of Hormuz. That is what I'm referring to here as one leverage that Iran can play, and it will play. And I know I asked that question from the community, and thank you for participating on that. I think 80% of you said, yeah, Iran this time around will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And that's, again, you have to think in terms of how this is going to shape this particular escalated confrontation. This influential position will play on maritime level, was going to play a major role in this. And this leads me, and by the way, this is happening as the situation is becoming more sort of confused or murky, if I may use the term here. Because you have on a tactical level on one side, and you have the political and security indicators on the other. And my reference on the latter part, the political and the security, has to do with the visit of the U.S. Central Command, General Brad Cooper, to Israel. So he's in Israel. So the idea is that also you take into consideration the cancellation of flights to the region by major international airlines. That in itself should reflect to you the fears and the concerns of an uncontrolled escalation. That's again where my concern is. This time around, I believe this time around, we will see a different Iran. I know some said this should have finished the last time. Maybe. But if I am to go back just quickly here, because I need to highlight a key aspects about the Strait of Hormuz. What about the Strait of Hormuz? What will become of it in case of an attack on Iran? So, because this, in my opinion, the Strait of Hormuz could face serious disruption, which are going to be, even though some analysts are arguing, well, you know what? A complete closure remains some sort of debated. I don't think so this time around, because Iran has the capacity to disrupt that. The coastal defense of Iran network, because this coastal defense is equipped with anti-ship missiles that include Khalij al-Faris. I have pictures of these particular missiles here, so I'm going to share them with you right here. Khalij al-Faris. This one is about 300-kilometer range. Then you have Hormuz 1 and Hormuz 2. I do have a picture of the second missile right here. No, this is a C-802. I'm sorry, here is the Hormuz 2. This is the Hormuz 2. Same range, 300-kilometer range. Then you have the C-802 cruise missiles. This is about 120 kilometer range. And by the way, this particular elements, those are in addition to thousands of unmanned aerial vehicles. And all this will threaten shipping. You saw what happened in the Red Sea. How many companies sent their ships through the Red Sea once Ansarullah declared a blockade on ships? So, and in addition to all this, Iran has also concentrated sort of on acquired naval mines. Those are, in addition to armed speedboats, powerful anti-cruise missiles positioned along the bottleneck of the Strait of Hormuz. And like I said, when I asked the community, will Iran shut it down? 85% of you said yes. 8 said no, and 7% said don't know. And we had about almost 2,400 participants in that. Thank you for participating in that. And that's, again, when I have to go back in history and see how Iran can play a role into this. Suffice it to understand that the idea is that during June 2025, by the way, at least for us here, the IC, the intelligence community's assessment, what they have detected at that time, of course, wasn't made public till later on, that Iranian military forces loading naval mines onto vessels in the Persian Gulf. And what is that for? That's usually your indication for preliminary steps to blockading the strait. Because Iran has also other alternatives. For example, Iran could lay mines, use the IRGC Navy to strike or seize vessels. Of course, the US will retaliate, and if it retaliates, things will escalate. We all know where this is going to be going. But think about also the economic impact, not only in the region, but on the global level. The stakes are enormous. It was an analysis that I had a chance to read it one time by Goldman Sachs. And their analysts predicted that a blockade could push oil prices over $100 a barrel. This is what you're going to be seeing. It will be a nightmare here in the US if those prices go to that level. Others have estimated, some other entities also suggest that it could go even to $150 a barrel. And that in itself will affect Asian importers, China, Japan, South Korea, and the like, which collectively imports about 10 million barrels of oil a day through the Strait of Hormuz. That is why that card is also going to be played out, and I am certain of it. Liking this video so far? Don't just be a watcher. Go ahead and hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And don't forget to tap the bell so you will not miss any of my videos or live streams. This way, you will be supporting a channel that stands for the truth and objective reporting. The choice is yours. Thanks for your support. And indeed, there are those who are saying, oh, no, Iran won't be able to do that. And I ask them why, and they say because of the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. What makes you think that Iran is going to wait and not attack that location? It will be stupid of Iran not to consider that while doing what it needs to do to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It's common sense. And that's why I don't entertain that idea of that, oh, no, the Fifth Fleet presence in Bahrain will deter Iran. I don't think so. I don't think so. This time is different because Iran already made the calls to those countries where the US is present, where the bases are. Hey, we are calling to let you know, should an attack occurs and we found out that it's launched from your territory, that particular location is going to become a target. Because remember one thing, and I kept a picture of this for a reason. Take a look here. Those are Iran's ballistic missiles. Yeah, all this is good and great, but if Iran doesn't act, it loses credibility completely. Except that for me, and I speak for myself, I feel this time is different. And this is not about emotions. No. This is about the reality of where things are going. And I'm talking about the global order. And to Iran, it is now or never. if it wants to play a role into this new global order. Because if it gets shut down, then it's over. And I don't think so they're going to allow it. And this leads me to ask the other fundamental question. Hypothetically, should the U.S. get involved into it? Will the U.S. be entangled for a long time in the region if it launches an attack on Iran? And remember, why will the U.S. do this? Doing it on behalf of Israel. So this, you can ask any well-informed geopolitical analyst, and will tell you the answer is yes. Because any attack on Iran of this magnitude will entangle the U.S. Vietnam War started just by, we're going to just wipe them out. Iraq invasion started from that premise. And I remember I argued against it because I said, it's going to take longer for you to get out. Oh, no, we will get in, liberate Baghdad, and get out. It is 18 years later. And this is, again, if the war turns into protracted, if it becomes protracted conflict with some sort of the U.S. involvement, because the U.S. is going to be dragged into this, not only involvement, but also casualties. This, in my opinion, the outcome of this could draw towards a regime change, which what the U.S. will want as the only way out. But I don't see that happening. So, and of course, Bibi Netanyahu will be positioned as an enabler for this direction, like he did with Baghdad. You all remember, the invasion of Iraq was because of what Netanyahu pushed behind closed doors the Americans to do. And this is the key risk, in my opinion, is that the United States could get bogged down in another military quagmire. I'm going to use the term carefully here in West Asia. And of course, we all know the strategic implications to all this, especially when you consider not just the region, West Asia, but the Asia-Pacific theater as well. And that in itself will lead to some sort of, not escalating, but cascading instability. Because if the conflict persists, or if Iran becomes destabilized, which, by the way, most of the countries in the region do not want that, including those that host U.S. military installations or bases. Saudis don't want it. Qatar doesn't want it. United Arab Emirates doesn't want it. Bahrain, they all don't want it because they know what it means. And the stability on the Gulf Arab countries, it's not just about the refugees, because this is where it's going to become very tense, especially when you think about the Shia population. And again, I am not focusing on the religious aspect, because you're going to have to think about how the Shias going to feel. Could it become radicalized, like, or sort of strengthen their position, like what happened in Iraq? Which, by the way, in Iraq, as of today, the U.S. already warned the government about the president of Iraq. They're going to have elections soon, and they want one that listens to the U.S. That tells you Iraq has never been freed. So, and this is why when you think about places like Iraq, Lebanon, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and so forth, this is why the region, countries within the region, certainly have this massive fear of the consequences of a war between Iran and the United States, or even Iranian military sort of reprisal against U.S. bases in Persian Gulf. And if this is not enough, you think about the strategic complications. And that in itself will remain. This is why you have right now U.S. bases in those countries, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. Jordan, Egypt, you don't hear much about it because it's a small presence. So, and this is why you have now some sort of bases remain on a high alert now. Why? Because they are expecting that some militias in Iraq could attack U.S. positions near Erbil and Baghdad. That's what they're still having there. You think about Ansarullah or Houthis, because they have renewed their sort of strikes against Red Sea shipping in case. So you see where this is going. And as to the diplomatic challenges, that I don't think so it will be viable, because Iran will shut down the door to diplomacy. I've argued this months and months. Wasting their time on negotiating with the West is futile, fruitless. They don't need to. Because you still have the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, still saying about Iran needs to be monitored as far as its program and so forth. Because here is the harsh truth that I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to ask you here. Do you think after 30 years of working on a nuclear program, Iran couldn't develop the bomb? I mean, literally. North Korea came after Iran by so many years, and they developed it. You think Iran will not develop this over a period of 30 years? Food for thought. I just want you to think. Because here is the harsh reality, especially when you tie it to this nuclear program. A military action, in my opinion, cannot definitely resolve the Iran's nuclear program. So, and this is where you're going to have, should the US go that route, this is going to be leaving the US now potentially committed to sustain military presence and engagement for years. Exactly what happened in Afghanistan. And what was the outcome? How did we leave Afghanistan? With the tail between our legs. It was very embarrassing. I mean, we shouldn't be there in the first place. I went there the first year after 9/11. So, literally, and I argued, what are we doing here? You know, there was a chain of command, and you know, when you have a general, well, we can tackle it this way, Mr. O. Yes, sir, but you know, if I am to use history as my guide, I tell you that no empire was able to conquer this country. What makes us think that we could? That's just hubris. Respectfully, sir. So you know how it is. And this is again paved the way for, to go back to that key point about US bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and so forth. Will Iran attack them in retaliation of the US? It is, to me, it's a relevant question. We cannot ignore it. Yeah, relationships are good between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but don't fall for that. Don't fall for why the Saudis will always look at Iran with suspicion. Because they fear the influence of Iran in the region. And it's not like Iran wants to take over the Muslim world, as some have said, which I pushed back against that narrative. Iran was never, ever interested in dominating the Muslim world. They don't care for that. That's not their forte. And this is why I believe the evidence that's suggested in June 2025, when Iran launched the missile on Al-Udeid, you know, and it was a short-range missile, by the way. I think there were medium range involved. I don't recall. I do know for a fact it was a short range, because when I looked at the types of missiles they were used, you know, those will be a short range. And that in itself, so because what Iran wanted to do is just to send a message. And that is why, of course, Qatar said that they intercepted the missile. I don't think so. I don't think so. Iran's calculated the distance and so forth and the coordinates and so, because they just wanted to send a message. They didn't want to kill anybody. That's why there were no casualties. But in comparison to what Israel did inside the capital in Doha. And that's why Iran has already taken the initiatives of a formal warning to regional countries. So because to my knowledge, Iran already informed Qatar, Saudi Arabia, that it will hit American targets in those countries if the US attacks Iran. And these two regions, these two countries, because they do have some sort of a good relations with the US, except that the US has the upper hand in that relationship. So it's not on an equal footing per se. So that means still Iran thinks in terms of these two countries can convince the US not to do so. But when you think in a bigger picture, is that from Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates to Turkey or Turkey, the US bases in those countries will be attacked. Interesting that Iran didn't mention Turkey, because Turkey is a NATO member. If NATO member is attacked, Article 5 will be activated, and that will give justification. Iran is smart enough to know where to use. And this is where, and I'm coming closer to an end here, just to highlight to you the idea of lessons from history. If we are to think about Iran's great strategy. Now, there are some scholars here in the US, they're arguing, oh, this strategy is collapsing and so forth. Maybe, maybe not. So if it was collapsing, how come Iran is still standing on its feet after almost 39 years of sanctions? Yes, the economy is not doing well. Yes, you saw the recent protests and so forth, which was fueled by foreign intelligence services. And this, when you think in terms of, if we are to look, like I argued in my Iran book when I did the, I think the history part of Iran, I said we cannot understand Iran today if we don't understand its history. It's the past. It's importance. It's very important to understand this, but also will give us an idea, an opportunity to place the strategy of Iran within its proper context, how it intends to deal with the US. That's why I disagree with those scholars that are saying, well, it's completely is going to collapse. No, it's not. Yes, is it in a difficult situation? Yes, it is. And this is why I believe this time around, Iran will have to respond in case the US engaged in something like this. And this could also be, after all, it's just a posturing on part of the United States. We tend to do this a lot. We had the many forces in the region to begin with. It's not like those 40,000 forces just deployed to them. No. Some of them are already there. That's no different than what we have in Europe, like in Germany. How many we have in Germany? How many we have in South Korea? Think of it that way. The troops are already there. So. And the idea of where the IRGC sort of publicly stating that US bases in a region are not strength, but rather vulnerabilities. And I couldn't agree more with that assessment, because when you have a target like this in an open sea, yeah, it is some sort of a symbol for strength, but at the same time, it is a target. That was the reason why Harry Truman aircraft had to move north back then when tensions started against the Ansarullah, and they moved it up north because they knew that if it stayed there, it would become a target, because we didn't know what Ansarullah were getting from the Russians. The same argument I will make as to what the IRGC stating, and that in itself signals that Iran view these installations as the primary retaliatory targets. And I can see why. So the question becomes for us, before I'll share the conclusion here, an excerpt from my book. The question is, how much Israel will really lobby behind closed doors to push the US for another war with Iran? But does Israel understand the ramification of that? Israel will not be spared this time around. We saw what happened last time. Yes, I read a white paper from Washington, and the argument was that the Israelis have strengthened their Iron Dome and all the air defenses. And this time around, the way I see it, how Iran's going to play it, Iran's going to have to launch everything it has, overwhelming the systems completely. So it behooves Iran to think, really think strategically, because what Israel will end up doing, if it is seen its demise, is going to result to the nukes. And if it does that, we all know what two countries did, North Korea and Pakistan, threatened the retaliation if they ever use the nukes against Iran. And if that get to that point, well, it's over. We all know what it means. So let me share an excerpt from my Iran book, and I'll conclude with that one. It is what I argued back then. Of course, it was the big picture of what was taking place. While the 1979 revolution in Iran created some sort of change and threw the country into anarchy, because it was, Saddam Hussein made a strategic mistake by attacking Iran, thinking he could take advantage of the chaos. He discovered that the attack allowed Iranians of all stripes to join in defense of their country. By 1982, Iran regained some of its lost territory. This conflict marks the beginning of the involvement of different players, regional and global, one that shaped the outcome and changed the region geopolitical calculations. So the question is, will the US be making the same mistake? Anyway, hope you all enjoyed this analysis here. And I just wanted to, I'm going to keep my eyes open on this.
An update to what's going on with Minneapolis and some of the details surrounding it. You can see here fresh waves of National Guard making their way into the area. These National Guard are called up by Tim Walz, not Trump. Okay? There's a big difference. That's why when we warn you of civil war, this is what we mean. They're going to literally be using military factions or police units against one another. Interesting developments out of all this. It seems, as I've told you many times, these events are put out there to sow chaos and division, and they want people jumping on one side or the other and fighting over it. We can clearly see that, so you need not fall into the trap. Those that do look foolish when they do, and obviously they're lost in the left-right paradigm. They may hear of the left-right paradigm, but they never actually soak it up and understand that it's a huge illusion because they're so bought in to one side or the other. Now, I know things are not good out there with certain aspects all the way around. But in this instance, the fuel being thrown on the fire big time with this new event, this new shooting that took place with the man that was wrestling with a bunch of other agents out there. It's like 4 or 5 of them. Nome is catching a ton of fire for this. And this is what happens when people just regurgitate whatever they hear without actually going and watching something. And see, she seemed to have not even seen any of the video clips when she was making statements. And a big chunk of Trump's base that was left out here, they've just jumped ship because they're sick of it. Even people that stuck through it with the pedo stuff. It's time people take a look in the mirror and like make a stand for what they believe in and quit jumping on bandwagons out here. Okay? Because everyone that went all in on this MAGA stuff, they're finding out the hard way, big time. Like I said, first off, it was with the pedos. Now they want to threaten guns. our rights, and they want to come out, even Kash Patel, and saying that you don't need to be going to a protest with a weapon. Well, people have got a right to go wherever they want, armed, constitutional carry, if you're in the right state, right? This is why I say watch out where you go, because some states and cities are trappy. You can't even constitutional carry there or carry and have a right to defend yourself. As we've seen in the situation here in the most recent shooting, it seems statements were made at the top level by Noam about this event that were not correct. She had made statements of a gun being pointed and other stuff that were just not correct. This has infuriated people on the right, the conservatives behind Trump, that are threatening to be done. So the only thing Trump can do is be done with her. Dump Noam. He's bringing in Tom Homan up here to the scene. And it just goes to show again that so many people out there are so quick to just jump on whatever a shill says out there without even actually looking at footage or doing anything else. And then they get burned on it. But, everyone's got their opinion. As I say here, anyone that wants to come with hate or threats, you're gone. Quick. You can't let this work on you. They want to have civil war. They want to sow division. And it's clear to see. A shout outs to all those out there that can clearly see it. And where they're wanting to take this. It's our job to not let it happen. So, crazy turn of events here. With Walls calling in the National Guard. I want you to remember this. If Trump pulls on the Insurrection Act, any ICE agents that go in here, they're going to face off against National Guard now, because that's the setup. Any Marines, as people keep saying, send in the Marines, they're going to be facing off against National Guard. Is that really what people want? You really want civil war like that? Like that? You want the National Guard Marines clashing in the streets? Is that what you want? Because that's what you're calling for. Okay, because the Marines aren't going to touch these protesters at this point. They're going to have to get through the National Guard. So people need to stop and think about these things. The setup right in front of us. It's there. It's a powder keg, and they want it to blow here. So also, I'll say this. Anyone that wants to twist things and try to say that I said things that I didn't, you're gone instantly as well. Just because you're so butthurt, you can take it out somewhere else. You can either stand for the truth and the real of the whole thing, or just push on.
Why these pardons are being held up. People like Tina Peters. Why the hell is Tina Peters still behind bars? This is insane. We're going to talk about all of that and more as Redacted starts right now. During an immigration enforcement operation, the reason the story has exploded isn't just because it's tragic, of course. It is anytime there's a loss of life. It's exploded because the official story immediately ran into a wall of video evidence. And then, of course, it exploded because politicians and celebrities and everyone else jumped online and social media and started to spin the story to fit their narrative. People were even fundraising off of this. Of course, that's how this usually works, right? To fit their own agenda. The man who was killed was a man by the name of Alex Preti. He was a 37-year-old ICU nurse, also worked with veterans, helping veterans. And according to reports, he was legally allowed to carry a firearm. He was registered, followed the letter of the law. But oddly, the widely shared footage doesn't show him holding a gun at the exact moment he's confronted. That's exactly what, of course, sparked a lot of this outrage. The gun appears to go off in the hands of a federal agent as he's carrying the gun across the street. Again, we need a full investigation before we can parse any of this. That's when, of course, another agent then opened fire, killing Alex. Now, even the NRA is calling for a full investigation, pushing back on this idea that lawful gun ownership somehow makes you a legitimate target because you carry a weapon. Now you are a legitimate target.
Which is exactly what Kash Patel said on Fox News over the weekend. My jaw hit the floor. He says, well, you shouldn't bring up a gun to a protest. You are allowed to do that. And Minnesota has open carry laws. This was a legal firearm. I couldn't believe it that this is a Trump administration official saying that you become a target for carrying a legal weapon. This is America. That's not how it works. Someone needs to tell him that.
The whole purpose is to weaponize against the tyrannical government. I mean, that's like the whole reason for the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
So President Trump also said he shouldn't have been carrying such a powerful gun, which 9mm? I mean, does he want him to carry an air rifle like a Red Ryder BB gun? Would that have been okay? I guess. Like, you'll shoot your eye out.
I won't touch the 9mm. I'm afraid of it. I only do the 22s.
She only shoots 22s. But even the NRA called that kind of rhetoric dangerous and wrong. Larry Johnson is a former CIA agent, counterterrorism official, and also an NRA certified firearms instructor who teaches gun safety and training every weekend. There he is. He just wrote a piece titled U.S. Border Patrol is Out of Control on his website, Sonar 21. Just read a little bit of it here. He says, as a certified firearms instructor, I have enough experience to know when law enforcement is out of line and engaging in a criminal conduct. Based on the video evidence I've seen, the shooting of Alex Pretty by a group of Homeland Security law enforcement officers was unjustified and most likely was caused in part by inadequate training. Well, we're going to talk more about that in just a second. You saw Larry there a second ago. He's here, and we wanted to bring him on for his analysis. Larry, great to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me. And let me be clear. I'm not here on behalf of the NRA. I'm just, I'm talking on my, so I don't represent them, and I can't say according to the NRA this is, but it's based upon my experience. I've trained over 2,000 people over the course of the years. I've trained in terms of what's called defensive pistol, concealed carry, how to protect yourself in the home, how to protect yourself outside the home. I've trained law enforcement officials, retired, there's a couple active, and military, former military. So it's not I'm just dealing with people who've never had experience with guns.
Now, before we get into the inadequate training piece, because that to me is a huge part of this story, and I think what happened in Minneapolis was really a microcosm of a larger problem that Tom Homan is now facing, which is inadequate training. Well, I want to put that on the back burner for just a second. On the front burner, though, I want to talk to this guy, Alex. And based on your experience, did he do anything wrong? He's there. No,
unjustified. This shooting is completely unjustified. It's manslaughter by police. We know that because in one part of the video, it's the one that was taken from the sidewalk side. If you slow it down, you can see that he had what's called an inside the waistband holster. And the holster was placed above his right butt cheek. You can see one of the police grab the gun. It was a SIG 320. Now, the SIG 320 has a bad reputation for going off. We don't know if this was one of those, but you can see the firearm is pulled. Now, what we can't tell is whether in pulling that firearm, did it go off, or did the police, the law enforcement officer, did he holler, gun, gun, gun? Either way, if he's hollering gun, 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 or they hear a shot, then the other officers could think at that point, oh my God, we're under attack, and they shoot the guy on the ground. Now, again, you're allowed to kill somebody, to take their life, if they pose an imminent threat of killing you or causing severe bodily harm. That's the standard, really across the United States. They weren't in that situation because this guy had not been out attacking police. He hadn't been punching anybody. In fact, he intervened to try to get the police to stop beating. They assaulted that woman. That woman had not done any. It'd be one thing if she had thrown a bottle of frozen water at him or a rock or something. She didn't do that. Then they come over and physically assault her. So that's assault number one. He steps in trying to get her out of the way, and then they attack him with pepper spray. They put him on the ground. If he had drawn his gun, then, he would have been a legitimate target. Now, you could also make the case he had a good reason to draw the gun, but when you hear the Trump administration advancing this lie that somebody is not legally allowed to carry a concealed weapon in public, That's the Second Amendment, folks. And
Why do you
exactly
think
as you said, Natalie, earlier?
Why do you think the dog pile begins when he has not reached for his gun? They have no assumption that he has a gun at this point. It's very unclear why so many need to be on him just for pushing a pepper sprayed victim out of the way.
Yeah, well, it's mob violence by police. I mean, when a mob starts acting, they're not acting with rational thought. Then this goes back to the heart of training. You know, it's one thing if somebody, you know, if this guy Alex Pratt, if he was throwing punches and had hit an officer, that was saying, if the officer simply come out, sir, we need you to move away, and he then punched him, then you would have reason for the police to come over and drop him and say, okay, you've assaulted an officer, we're taking you into custody. But there had been no assault by Pratt at this point, none. And neither the woman, she hadn't assaulted anybody. And so this goes to the training, because these officers, they should have known there was no legal, justifiable reason to put hands on these people. The only reason they put hands on them was because they could. They're just showing them we're big enough, we're bad enough, we're tough enough. You know, look, I'm supportive of law enforcement, but this is outside the bounds. This is blatant murder by federal officials.
So let's talk about this inadequate training. So I just spoke to a source on the Border Patrol side, and who said, you know, Clayton, this is at the heart of the problem, is that you had 6,000 Border Patrol agents, then you've increased it to 10,000. Trump administration wants to push it to 10,000 or 20,000. It takes at least 3 years minimum to be even in the ballpark of being out on the street. Most of these stations, whether you're in Omaha, Nebraska, or Des Moines, Iowa, have about 100 Border Patrol agents at these stations. Out of those 100, 10 of them, 10% are out in the field. That's it. The rest of them are like lawyers, and they're doing casework inside of the office. Really, it should be the opposite. It should be 80% should be out in the field.
Right.
And most of these people have almost no training whatsoever. They've been on the job for a minimal amount of time. They don't have any apprehension skills where they've had 3 years of actually apprehending people. And this is at the heart of the problem here. You have all of these people around them throwing bottles and other things like involved in it. It's just it's a recipe for disaster.
Well, on top of that, it is the difference between the training that a customs border officer is going to go through is different from what law enforcement, police, whether we're talking, you know, local city, county, state, and within that is attention paid to the Constitution. So I guarantee you that these Border Patrol officers are not getting a week lesson about the constitutional protections because they're being told you're dealing with illegals. They don't have constitutional rights.
Right.
Now,
and then they're out there dealing with illegals. And then suddenly you get like organized leftist groups who are showing up. So like their job, I mean, let's be clear, right? Their job is to go after illegal immigrants. And they're in the heart of it. They're in the heart of it, going after these Somalis. And I know one source I spoke to today made 5 arrests today. And of those 5 arrests, they all had criminal records. They're all on welfare. And these are like violent criminals that they were rounding up. So you're out, that's your job. And then on top of it, you've got these like leftist groups who are throwing bottles at you and trying to get in your way.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'm not trying to suggest, because I support getting rid of the flood of illegal migrants that have come into the country. But you do it according to the law.
Yeah.
And one of the things that most law enforcement officers get is instruction on how to de-escalate. Now, I'll be willing to bet you when they go through and vet a lot of these new customs officers or Border Patrol officials, I bet you'll find that there are some former police who were removed from law enforcement jobs in the state or county because of past abuse. And because you find a lot, there's a great channel called the Civil Rights Attorney, guy out of West Virginia.
He's going to be on next, actually, after you.
Oh, is he?
Yes. He's going to be joining us here in a few minutes after you.
So he's got story after story showing where law enforcement officials really cross the boundary and do not respect the constitutional rights. And I guarantee you, these Customs and Border officials, they're not getting that because they're being told you're basically dealing with illegals. In fact, part of the training course that was shorted, or they cut the training in half, that training course was learning to speak Spanish. So they've now ruled out that you may not even be able to communicate. But it also this is a failure of leadership, because it's one thing, you've got an officer acting inappropriately, but they're being told to do that. And the leadership at the top needs to make it clear, you're not out here to see who you can beat up, who you can push, who you can put hands on. We're going to follow the law. And in fact, what we've heard is they're going to allow them to start entering homes without a warrant. Violation of the Constitution, clear violation. Right. And yet the fact that you got people in leadership that are willing to entertain that, I said,
there's no constitution anymore.
Accountable. Yeah,
but it does seem like the Trump administration has blinked on this one in a way they did not around the Renee Good shooting, where her car was a possible threat and out there. A good point in the chat. Someone says conceal carry is the way to go in this one, because you are going to a situation with law enforcement. You don't want to look like an overt threat. You do want to be protected. So anyone who knows anything about gun rights would probably condone that, don't you think?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, what the Trump administration has done now is further enraged a group that in the past were supporting Trump.
Gun owners.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Gun owners like me, all of my students. I guarantee you, most of my students, if you surveyed them, they'd be saying this is outrageous. Just to be able to say, well, he had a gun. Yeah, but was he reaching for it? No. Was he brandishing it? Brandishing means you got it out, you're waving it around. No. Then you don't have a right to shoot him. That's the kind of thing you think somebody who's against gun rights would do. Just to say, you got a gun, you're guilty because you have a gun. Wait a second. That's why we got the Second Amendment, to protect us against this kind of government overreach.
Is there any threat that this might change the Second Amendment? They're
pushing. They're already pushing, Larry. You already know they're pushing. They're pushing for different magazine restrictions, all sorts of stuff. They're already out there pushing for it.
Yeah. What do you do when the Republicans who are supposed to support this issue are now turning around and blaming the victim for following and abiding by the Constitution? Right. Now, look, this kid is younger than my son. So if he'd come to me and said, hey, I'm going to go out and protest, I'd say, I would have told him, keep the gun at home, just to avoid the possibility of problem, because you want to keep it peaceful. But if you're going to carry, you still have the right to carry. It's not prohibited. And I said, there are other prohibitions. I can't take it into the post office. I can't take it into an elementary, middle school, high school, or college. Mm-hmm. I can't take it to a public sporting event. So there are a variety, even with the Second Amendment, there are a number of areas in different states defined where you can and cannot carry a firearm. This guy was on the public streets. There were no restrictions.
I just want to play this real quick, Larry, before we let you go here, which is you mentioned the type of firearm this 9mm.
Yeah.
I own a 365 X Macro. A Sig Sauer. I love it. Yeah. This is a Sig. This one though has some different problems. I just want to play this and show how there's all sorts of problems with it just going off randomly. So if this law enforcement guy is carrying the gun and it just goes off in his hand, watch this.
Put some input into the slide somewhere. Will it go off again? Will it release? Let's see. That's 3 in a row. Let me take the screw out.
So, Larry, what he's showing here, of course, is that just by putting pressure on the top allows this to go off.
Yeah, that's the Sig Sauer 320.
It's a known issue.
It's what's called it's striker fired. So you notice on the back it didn't have a hammer.
Right.
You can see a hammer. You can cock it and decock it. Didn't have a hammer. The firing pin, it's internal, but there have been reports of those going off on their own, and it's possible that this guy, I'm not sure what year it was, his year of that firearm that was owned by Alex, But when the officer grabs it and pulls it out, if in that action of pulling, a round went off and everyone heard the gunshot, then everything, oh my God, we're being shot at, and they start shooting. Now, again, you're supposed to be able to identify the threat. Just because you hear something doesn't mean you can pull your gun out and just start shooting randomly. But as we talked about earlier, there were 5 people on top of him. For God's sake, he wasn't a World Wrestling Federation champion on the ground there. And if those 5 guys were not properly instructed just how to get control of a man's arm and wrist, I mean, there are some techniques, and it appears that none of them are actually properly instructed in that.
Right. Again, the training. Again, I come back to the training. I mean, Tom Holman, these guys have a real big problem on their hands. I don't want this to get lost in the story. I just really feel like that this is a microcosm of a larger problem right now.
Can I just say, the chat room is very obsessed with the fact that he didn't have ID and that the Second Amendment requires ID. In this moment, is that knowable? Can you respond to that?
Okay, so did you see the police officer walk up to him and say, "Mr. Who are you?" And he could have said, "Well, I refuse to identify myself," but that didn't happen.
No.
Did you see the police say, "Where's your ID?" They didn't ask for that. So, hey, chat room, you're wrong. If he was asked for an ID and failed to produce it, then even then, and you'll talk to the lawyer in a little bit, and he'll explain the actual law on that, the constitutional. If you are not seen committing a crime or suspected of committing a crime, no law enforcement officer in the United States has a right to ask you for your ID. None of your damn business.
Well, they didn't even give him the chance to let him know that he was armed.
Yeah.
All of this stuff through conversation could have been settled.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great
right.
point.
Yeah. Absolutely right. So if they had asked for his ID, and he could say, "Why? What have I done?" And they could say, "Well, you are obstructing an investigation." Okay, then that could be a borderline, but they could still make the case that he should produce his ID. But again, he wasn't given the chance to do that. He was assaulted because he was trying to help defend a woman who had been assaulted.
Yeah.
And then he gets shot, and it is at a minimum, it's manslaughter.
A lot of times, I wonder if it matters. I'm just thinking. I carry a digital. I have the app. We have a driver's license on the app, and so maybe he didn't have it on him, but now he's dead. He can't open his phone. That may have counted. We don't know, right?
Yeah.
So that feels like nitpicking in order to justify something that you want a means to an end. This ID
completely unjustified, because they didn't come up to him at any point and say, "Hey, can you produce your ID?" They didn't give him a chance.
Yeah.
They assaulted him, beat him down, and then shot him.
Now, one more question? Are you allowed to help someone who's been pepper sprayed by the cops? That's all. It seems like he did.
From a human standpoint, yes. Just humanity.
Right.
Humanity.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, we're going to speak to John Bryan next, the civil rights lawyer.
What if freedom's greatest hour?
26. Scott Ritter joins us now. Scott, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. Before we talk about whatever they're discussing in Abu Dhabi, and before we talk about how Ukraine may be close to a breaking point, your take on the killing of Alex Pretty in Minneapolis, which to my view, in 50 years as a lawyer and a judge, was an act of murder.
Well, I totally concur. Let me start my take by pointing out that, as disturbing as the murder of this ICU nurse who is simply exercising his First Amendment rights and his Second Amendment rights in a nonviolent fashion, and it was murder. As disturbing as that is, what I find even more disturbing is the ignorance of the American mob when it comes to the Constitution. The level of hatred that Americans have in their hearts to their fellow Americans, the level of ignorance that exists in the hearts and the brains of many people who call themselves Americans. And the sad fact is, if we had a litmus test for American citizenship derived solely from the knowledge of the Constitution, the vast majority of Americans would fail this litmus test. I've never been more disappointed in my fellow citizens than I am today. This man was straight up executed. You may not agree. I mean, look, people can sit there and say, I voted for Trump's policies of mass deportation, that I support an aggressive ICE posture. That's your right, as long as what ICE is doing is constitutional. The problem is many courts have found that what ICE is doing is unconstitutional. But you can never, regardless of how you feel about ICE, say that it is un-American for Americans to hold a differing opinion. And there are many Americans who feel that what ICE is doing is not just unconstitutional, but un-American. And they oppose it. And they oppose it using the tools of, civil disobedience, peaceful demonstrations. And ICE has responded with excessive force across the board, whether it is the pummeling of Americans, throwing, tear gas, spraying, pepper spray, shooting, non-lethal devices, or straight up executing Americans in the streets of American cities. ICE is responding in a manner that should cause every American despair, because this is not what we want to see in our streets. Now, people may say, well, we don't want to see demonstrations. The hell you don't. That's what we're about. I mean, I don't mean to get angry, but my God, when Americans say you shouldn't have been there, what do you mean you shouldn't have been there? When you say you shouldn't have been there, you're saying you shouldn't have exercised your rights, your God-given rights, your constitutionally protected rights of freedom of assembly, the right to demonstrate, the right to protest, the right to stand up and say no to a government who has exceeded all bounds of normalcy, of legality. That is your duty and responsibility as an American. Other Americans may disagree, but my goodness, to sit there and say this man deserved to be executed in the street by a bunch of ill-trained ICE thugs, it means you have no clue what it means to be an American. No clue whatsoever. This man did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. He simply went to the aid of a woman who was shoved to the ground. He did not assault an ICE officer. The video clearly shows this. And then he was sprayed in the face by a guy wearing a mask. Judge, I don't know how you feel about this. I've been trying to find the constitutional law on this, but when you put a mask across a law enforcement officer's face, how the hell can you say that he's giving clearly articulated instructions? You can't. And when you spray pepper spray in the face of somebody and then start shouting through a mask, how do you comply with that? How do you comply with that? This has violated, and I know this to be a fact because I did the research, violates every protocol set forth by the Department of Justice, by ICE itself, by every police department about the use of force. You're supposed to de-escalate, not escalate. And ICE is in a 100% escalation mode that led to the tragic execution, because that's what this was, the execution of an American city in broad daylight for simply carrying out his constitutionally protected right to say, I don't want ICE in my streets.
Man, I couldn't agree with you more. This will aggravate you even more. This is lies the government is telling you. Chris, cut number 8.
Who goes to a protest and brings a gun? I mean, was he not asking for some kind of trouble in that situation?
But as Secretary Noem said, no one who wants to be peaceful shows up at a protest with a firearm that is loaded with 2 full magazines. That is not a peaceful protest.
And I don't know of any peaceful protester that shows up with a gun and ammunition rather than a sign.
I'm sorry that this gentleman is dead, but he did bring a 9mm semi-automatic weapon with 2 cartridges to what was supposed to be a peaceful protest.
Peaceful protesters don't have 9mm weapons.
He wasn't there to peacefully protest. He was there to perpetuate violence.
I mean, as you know, he was an ICU nurse, worked for the Veterans Administration, and there's no evidence that he brandished the gun whatsoever. In fact, it appears
But he
that
brought
he was
a gun.
disarmed before
he brought a gun. I've been to a protest.
Yeah.
Guess what? I didn't bring a gun. I brought a billboard.
You cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple. You don't have that right.
Under Minnesota law, if you have a permit to own and a license to carry, and you have it concealed, you can bring it to a protest. You can bring it to anywhere you want. I asked Tim Pawlenty, who was the governor of Minnesota, who signed that legislation into law, and he agrees. So Kash Patel, yet again, is wrong. The young man did nothing violent. You can see the way they treated him. We're going to show you a picture. Chris, put up the picture that we got from Matt. You'll see the picture. That guy just blows him away at point blank range while Preddy is on all fours, although there he's only on 3. The gun has already been removed from him. The gun was in a holster in the small of his back.
Judge, it's not just Minnesota law, and I respect Minnesota law. It's the Constitution. The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled decisively in 2 cases, one here in New York, the other one, I believe, in California, where the government has tried to limit the places where people can carry concealed weapons. And while there were some limitations agreed to, nowhere did they say you can't bring a concealed weapon to a demonstration such as this, to a protest. If you had to apply for a permit and you received a permit, that becomes a protected zone. But here you have people in the streets of their neighborhoods protesting what they believe to be an illegal occupation. It's not a violent protest. It's also not a protest that required a permit. Under the U.S. Constitution, this man had every right to carry a weapon. And Kash Patel is dead wrong. Noam is dead wrong. Bennett is dead. The entire Trump administration is dead wrong. And frankly speaking, everybody who speaks out against this man because he brought a weapon to this demonstration is dead wrong. I mean, good Lord, I guess that makes every Minuteman in America dead wrong. Can't show up in Concord or Lexington, guys, because you got weapons. Take them home. I'm not advocating rebellion, but what I am saying is the founding fathers put the Second Amendment in there for a reason. And many Americans feel the need to carry weapons to protect themselves. I don't know what went through this man's mind when he strapped on that day. What I do know is that he was a law-abiding citizen. He wasn't violating any laws, and he had every right to carry that weapon and to be executed for it, and to have that execution justified by the constitutional ignorance of people who've taken an oath to uphold and defend that Constitution is, frankly, one of the most outrageous, enraging things I can think of.
This is a form of nihilism, a belief in no values and a belief that life is meaningless. This is what's been manifested by ICE and by their defenders in the government, a cross-section of which we just played.
I couldn't agree more. Again, I've become increasingly despondent about the health of my constitutional republic. And it is my constitutional republic. It's your constitutional republic. It's every citizen of this United States, these United States. It's our constitutional republic. We, the people of the United States of America. It belongs to us, and it can only survive if we are willing to defend it. But we must be willing to defend that upon which it is based, solely based, and that is the Constitution of the United States of America. I am tired of people, accusing me of being not unpatriotic because I insist that the Constitution be followed. What they don't understand is you are inherently unpatriotic the moment you allow government or anybody to deviate from the rules, the rule of law set forth by the Constitution. We cease to function as Americans at that point in time. And sadly, what I'm seeing is a large number of Americans We have submitted to the will of the mob, the whim of the mob, and the mob operates at the dictate of the emperor. And that's where we are today, where the emperor is dictating, the mob is complying. And if you feed them enough blood and violence, they'll be satisfied. This is entertainment for so many people. I voted for this. People said, you voted for an ICU law-abiding nurse to be executed in the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's what you voted for, because that's what you got. And you're going to get more of it unless we finally rally to bring an end to this nonsense.
Robert Reich, liberal Democrat, was Secretary of Labor in the Obama administration, has prepared a very, very compelling and terrifying video. It's about a minute, 20 seconds long. Watch this.
Trump wants to invoke the Insurrection Act to punish anyone who opposes him. You need to be aware of this imminent danger. It's unfolding very, very rapidly. He's following a 4-point plan that you need to know about. Step 1 is to deploy ICE into so-called blue cities run by Democrats. These masked and armed ICE agents are wreaking havoc on American cities and violating due process. They're arresting people outside immigration courtrooms. They're raiding homes in the middle of the night and detaining children and adults, including American citizens. They admit to using racial profiling. These aggressive tactics are provoking demonstrations, which leads me to step 2, exaggerate the scale and severity of the protests. Trump has described Portland as a war-ravaged city burning to the ground, but Portland's own police chief has debunked that.
City of Portland is about 145 square miles. This is one city block. Even the events that are happening down there do not rise to the level of attention that they are receiving.
And Trump continues to describe Chicago as a war zone. But recently, that's because of ICE agents who've sprayed tear gas, pepper balls, and rubber bullets into crowds of journalists and protesters gathered outside a detention facility. But that doesn't seem to matter to Trump. It's all part of a plan to establish a pretext for step 3, deploy National Guard troops. Trump is deploying hundreds of National Guard troops from red states like Texas into blue states like Oregon and Illinois against the wishes of Democratic governors. This is continuing to enrage an already outraged public, which is the whole point. Trump wants to stoke actual violence, which would make it easier for him to unleash the final step in his plan, which is step 4, invoke the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act empowers a president to federalize the National Guard and use the U.S. military to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, or armed rebellion against the government.
Look, what can we say? This is a step-by-step analysis of the facts as they present themselves. Nothing that he said is unfounded. There has been talk of the Insurrection Act. You hear whispers of this all over, not just whispers, statements about it. And when you take a look at the reality that this is a president who has publicly divorced himself from the rule of law, he only relies on his own sense of morality, no legal compass, just a moral compass, which is problematic in the extreme. This is also a man who is hungry for power. We see this with his so-called Board of Peace, where he creates an alternative United Nations where he is the chairman for life. People donate money that doesn't go to the U.S. Treasury, but goes to offshore accounts that he alone manages, in total violation of the emoluments clause of the Constitution. But the Constitution doesn't matter either, because he clearly isn't bound by it, and Congress isn't willing to hold him to account by it. We have a midterm election coming up, and my concern is that the timing of this so-called insurrection is going to correspond with the lead up to midterm elections, because he's going to lose the midterm elections if we had free and fair elections. This man is as unpopular as the day is long. The economy is collapsing. His policies are ripping this country apart. And there's a growing recognition, even among the military that ostensibly supports him, that this man has gone off the constitutional, path. And, so he's playing a very dangerous game. I will never openly advocate, or even I will never advocate for a civil war. It's not the solution. We have a constitutional republic. The solution is simply abide by the Constitution, let the checks and balances play out, and have an informed American population participate in the electoral process to elect the right people to office. That's how we cure this. But if he continues to go down this path, we may find ourselves in a nation awash in a wave of violence, violence that will rip this country apart permanently. I don't want to see that, but that's the direction we're going. I mean, this is a very, very dangerous situation that, you can't be silent about this. And there's no way to overstate what Robert Reich has said, that we are looking at the conditions for a civil war to be created because of the mismanagement of a president who knows nothing about the Constitution and, as we have seen, is supported by people who are equally ignorant about what the Constitution means.
Let me switch gears. February 6th is fast approaching. It is, of course, the expiration date of the New START treaty. Why do you suppose the Trump administration has not responded at all to President Putin's offer to extend the terms of the treaty for another year?
We go back to President Trump's first term in office. He had a guy, I think Marshall Billingsley was his name. He was running the arms control effort for the Trump administration. He, his whole thing was that we had to get the Chinese involved. And it was sort of the worldview of Trump that Russia and China are linked at the hip, and therefore they negotiate as one. Both of those is one against America, and we need to have that kind of a relationship. And it failed, it floundered, it didn't get anywhere. The Chinese just aren't playing that game. The Chinese have said we're a sovereign state. And before we even begin to talk with the United States has to get its act together regarding Russia. Russia and the United States, two largest nuclear powers, have to come up with a bilateral treaty that quantifies what we're dealing with, and then China can come in. And if China comes in, of course, we have to get the UK and France to come in, and it's far more complicated than Trump has let out. But Trump has also been advised by people who are not advocates for arms control. They believe not in disarmament, but in armament. They believe when we say that it's peace through strength, that the strength implies a robust nuclear deterrence force that is not the equal of anybody, but superior to everybody. And they're looking for nuclear supremacy, which, of course, is the antithesis of basic arms control philosophy, where we try to create, mutual respect based upon, reciprocity. We're equal. Trump doesn't want to be equal with anybody. And so the New START treaty, which brings about caps of 1,550, Trump wants more nuclear weapons, not to maintain this cap or even seek additional reductions. He wants more. This is why the Defense Department's budget, calls for creating thousands of what they call plutonium pits. These are the basic core of nuclear weapons, and they're going to create these for the next generation of American nuclear weapons. Thousands. That means that we're not going to be limited to 1,550. We're probably going to be going up to 6, 8, maybe 10,000 weapons. That's the vision of Donald Trump. And so the New START treaty is incompatible to him and incompatible to the people that advise him. The Russians have also linked conditions to continuing the New START caps. One of those conditions is there will be no Golden Dome. If the United States seeks to build a missile defense shield whose purpose is ostensibly to eliminate the effectiveness of Russia's nuclear deterrence, Russia's not going to sit by and let that happen. And you can't have arms control at a time when one nation is trying to build a missile defense shield designed to obviate your deterrence capabilities. The Russians say if you go with Golden Dome, all bets are off. Well, Trump has doubled down the defense budget. $1.5 trillion contains a huge chunk. In fact, one of the reasons why he's seeking to acquire Greenland is to deploy aspects of this Golden Dome missile defense shield into Greenland. So Trump's not interested in arms control. He's interested in an arms race. I mean, if people are interested, I just published a book about it, Highway to Hell. Read it, because we are literally on a highway to hell. When I wrote that book, I was hopeful that we could get off the highway to hell by, continuing New START. That's not going to happen. We are going to enter an arms race, and I'm just going to tell the American people right now, it's going to cost you trillions of dollars, and none of it's going to work. None of the systems we're going to build are going to function. The missile defense shield will not function. We will simply go bankrupt. Defense industries will make a lot of money, and we will put ourselves at risk of a nuclear war that ends all life on the planet. But that's okay, because we have a president whose sense of personal morality trumps everything.
Wow. How close to the end is the Ukrainian military?
So that's let me just make it clear. They've lost this war and they can't win this war. They'll never win this war. But what the Ukrainians have shown an ability to do is sacrifice the genetic future of their nation, that is their manpower, on a battlefield with no hope of victory. Europe has been willing to sacrifice them. The United States has been willing to sacrifice them. And the Ukrainian leadership of Volodymyr Zelensky has been shown a proclivity for sacrificing. And so as long as Ukraine is willing to throw bodies into the meat grinder will continue to function. The Russians are making progress. They are making, slow but steady progress across the entire front. They're chewing up the Ukrainians, spitting them out, and continuing to advance. And nothing can stop this. The Russians have said they'd prefer, that the Ukrainians accept reality and just get out of the Donbass right now and save 100,000 lives. But if the Ukrainians want to continue to fight, if Europe wants to continue to sustain this, Russia will push forward and Russia will win. There's nothing NATO can do to stop Russia. There's nothing the United States can do to stop Russia. There's nothing Ukraine can do. But putting a date on this, it's tough, because how do you predict when a nation fails? Because that's what's going to happen. Now we're seeing indications of imminent failure right now. The energy war that Putin is waging against Ukraine is devastating to Ukrainian society. Entire cities that have been without power, people freezing, no water, no electricity. We're looking at societal collapse, and with that comes political collapse, and that could be paralleled by military collapse, and then Ukraine is out of this war. But the Ukrainian people have shown themselves to be surprisingly resilient. And as I mentioned once before, the Russian military has never, ever denigrated the fighting capacity of the Ukrainians. They've always spoken very highly of them because, as the Russians say, they're the same as we are. They're tenacious. They're willing to fight to the death. And they don't yield at all. So it's literally Russians fighting Russians. And we know the Russians are tough son of a guns, and the Ukrainians are too. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, they're going to collapse this week, or collapse in the spring, or collapse in the summer. What I'm going to say is they're going to collapse. When they collapse is up to them, but the inevitability of this collapse is written in stone.
Tell me what you think of this unusual analysis from General Petraeus, of all people. Chris, cut number 3.
Essentially, the Ukrainians, without a navy, have sunk over 35% of the Russian Black Sea fleet and forced the entire fleet to tie itself up inside a port as far from Ukraine as it can get in southeastern part of the Black Sea. Ukraine has also carried out some incredible operations on Russian soil through the year, including the one in which maybe $1 million or so worth of small Ukrainian drones secreted in the roofs of large transport vehicles were able to position themselves near strategic airfields of Russia's thousands of kilometers apart and destroy or damage some $5 to $7 billion worth of strategic aircraft. To be sure, again, on the front lines, they've largely hardened, and the gains, such as they are, have generally been on the side of the Russians, but these have been glacial. They've been quite incremental, and they have been incredibly costly for the Russians.
I mean, what can I say to this? We all know that the Ukrainians have been very well trained by the CIA and by American Special Operations Forces, and they have carried out a number of daring missions inside Russia that have inflicted some harm. I'm reminded, though, of a war game that I was invited to participate in back when I was in the Marine Corps. I was sit down there, and it was right after the Gulf War, so I was feeling pretty cocky because of my counter Scud experience, and I took command of the Op 4 Special Forces, and I was running missions behind the lines. I was blowing up airplanes here, interdicting supplies here, and the whole time I was doing that, the main army got beat and we lost the war. And afterwards, people were going, "What did you think you were accomplishing?" I said, "I was just running around doing my thing." They said, "Yeah, but you know that you actually hurt your side. You didn't help your side." And the reason is that the more damage I did, the harder the American side punched back. And this is what Petraeus is missing. Okay, so you did $2 million worth of damage to the Russians. They have blown the hell out of Ukraine in response. I mean, does Petraeus not care for the Ukrainian people? Because they're the ones paying the price right now. They're the ones caught in the middle of this. David Petraeus is as ignorant as the day is long. I know he had 4 stars on his shoulder, and I know at one point in time he was the director of the CIA, but this is a man who, is so detached from reality, it's not even funny. If you don't understand that nothing the Ukrainians do to Russia is advancing their cause, that every little victory they get through special operations forces is responded tenfold. And his assessment of the Navy is superficial at best, because I'll tell you what, Judge, last night, the Russian Navy and the Black Sea Fleet fired Zircon missiles, and they fired Caliber missiles that blew the crap out of Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Take that, General Petraeus, and smoke it, because that's all it's good for, your analysis. It's like smoking dope. Gets you high, makes you feel good, doesn't accomplish a damn thing.
Scotty, thank you, my dear friend. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your brave defense of constitutional.
Kofi, follow me.